Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll have our news review with Mari, looking at all the headlines in this morning's newspapers, and we'll have the sport. But first, a reminder of the top stories this hour. Israel says 4 people have died and more than 70 people have been injured in overnight strikes by Iran. Explosions have also been reported in central Tehran as the two countries trade strikes for a 4th day. A man suspected of shooting dead a US politician and her husband and wounding 2 others in Minnesota have been arrested. Vance Bolter was detained following a 2-day manhunt after Melissa and Mark Hortman were killed at their home on Saturday. The Prime Minister has arrived in Canada for a meeting of the world's wealthiest nations. Sir Keir Starmer says the conference is an opportunity for leaders to have a broad conversation about global security in a constructive way, as the conflict between Israel and Iran continues to escalate. A nationwide police operation to track down those in grooming gangs has been announced by the Home Office. It comes ahead of the release of a government-commissioned rapid review into the scale of grooming gangs across the country, due to be published today. Staying with the Iran-Israel conflict, and it's difficult to estimate the number of casualties in Iran with no official confirmation. One human rights group has claimed at least 406 people have been killed and over 650 injured. Our correspondent, Adam Parsons, explains what areas have been targeted and why.
Well, what we've seen is another series of attacks by both Israel and Iran, with each country launching missiles at the other. In Israel, the first wave of Iranian strikes hit there, Bat Yam, just south of Tel Aviv, and then up there in Tamra, where at least 12 people have been killed. And remember, 3 Israelis died after Iran's previous attacks. Now, if we switch to Iran, Israel claims that around 50 fighter jets attacked some 80 sites, most of these linked to Iran's nuclear program. Iran claims the majority of casualties have been civilians, and it says that many of those have been women and children. Now, Israel is planning more attacks, and it has issued an evacuation warning to all Iranian residents who live near weapons facility, and has also said that the Ministry of Defense in Tehran is also in its sights. Israel says more Iranian military leaders have been killed, all of them senior commanders within the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. But strikes have also been reported on oil facilities. Now, in particular, we've got here the Sharan oil depot in Tehran. There are reports here of a huge explosion, although it's now said to be under control. But also in Israel, the Bazan refinery suffered what Israelis have referred to as localized damage. And all of that is having a really significant effect on global oil prices. Look at this. Over the past few days, they were trailing along and then spiked enormously. What we have, put it together, is an unpredictable conflict in a volatile region with an uncertain impact on the world's politics and economy. Little wonder the world is watching on nervously.
Let's bring in Matthew Saville now, the Director of Military Sciences at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, to talk a little bit more about all of this. Very good morning to you, Matthew. Great to see you as always. What's your latest assessment in light of the latest round of attacks overnight as to where we are with this? Are both sides going full throttle, or are they still showing relatively significant amounts of restraint on what they could be doing?
Good morning. Well, I mean, I think the Israelis have essentially achieved air superiority, which means they're able to operate almost without hindrance over most of western and central Iran. And they are prosecuting a campaign to do significant damage to the Iranian nuclear program. But the broader set of targets they are hitting appear to me to be about essentially trying to destabilize the regime. I mean, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has made pretty clear his intent on that score. I mean, for their part, the Iranians are not hitting back with as much as they could, but that seems to be because the Israelis are conducting what could be called an effective interdiction campaign. That is, they are striking particularly ballistic missile bases and launch sites before those weapons can be launched. Because as we've seen, even with probably the world's most effective layered air defense system, some ballistic missiles still get through. Ballistic missile defense is incredibly difficult.
What about the sort of capacity constraints that either side will face in the next days or weeks? Do they have plentiful supply of the missiles, the weapons that they're using, or not?
This is a huge unknown. On the Israeli part, they are firing off, obviously, very expensive ground-based interceptors of various kinds to defend against these incoming ballistic missiles. No one knows exactly how many they have. It's classified for a reason, but they will be biting into their stocks. And actually, for that reason, Israeli defense systems don't always engage incoming missiles if they calculate they're going to land in open ground, because they've got to husband those missiles. The Iranian ballistic missile stockpile has been variously estimated by Western intelligence and Israeli intelligence as maybe 2,000 to 3,000 missiles of the kinds that can reach Israel. The big unknown is how many of those have been destroyed. They've probably fired around 400 now in various waves, and the waves have been smaller each time. So that gives us some indication they are struggling to mass them, but we don't know what they've got in the locker. And that kind of battle between air defense interceptors and striking them on the ground and the Israeli stockpile is one of the key, if you like, determining factors in how long this kind of exchange can go on.
Do you think that this conflict, the day that we're in today, would only ever be via air, or could it involve clashes with ground troops as well? And then just stack up the numbers for us there, because Iran's a much, much bigger country than Israel.
I mean, Iran has a massive military, and it if you like, duplicates some of its military functions to its detriment. So you have the Artesh, the regular forces. You then have the Revolutionary Guards, who are responsible for most of the aerospace forces and air defenses. They then have a vast, if you like, militia called the Basij, intended to protect the regime. But the Israelis aren't going to be looking to sort of invade. Although if you're looking for ground activity, you wouldn't rule out more sort of daring commando type operations of the kinds that the Israelis have conducted in the past. The big problem will be, it is quite difficult to coerce a country the size of Iran with an air campaign alone, or rather, you can coerce them, but achieving regime change is going to rest on some pretty fine analysis on how brittle the regime actually is. And I'm not sure anybody really knows that.
And just finally, Matthew, what's Rusi's assessment of how close Iran really was to a nuclear weapon?
Well, what we don't have is the kind of the information that the Israelis have hinted that they've got, which is intelligence on the latest. And I'm relying very heavily on the expert analysis of our proliferation team on this. Iran was at a point where it was enriching uranium just short of the level necessary for weaponization, but that's quite an easy hop. It had assembled all of the knowledge necessary, we think, to create a weapon, but it hadn't, according to the most recent International Atomic Agency report, actually weaponized, but it was blocking access. It wasn't accounting for its past behavior. And in effect, what the Israelis are now claiming, it wasn't what Netanyahu said on the first night, is that some decision had been taken to move further along that path. And I think if they ever reveal that, that will explain a lot about whether or not there was an imminent threat, or whether their tolerance of the existing challenge, which was a very short timeline to at least assembling potentially a weapon, was actually the case.
Really interesting. As always, Matthew, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Right, time now for the latest sport.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Welcome to number 9 Goodison Road, the Strikers Suite. It's 27 years now since I bought this place. I used to have a box at Goodison. Those days, I used to watch the game through the box, which isn't the right thing to do. So I bought this place, converted the top floor to a flat, and then just, as you see, converted this to a corporate suite. I took the 10 lads from the box over with me, so it started as 10, now we've got 26. It's just a gang of mates who get together. We all throw in the kitties to sort of get our food and our drink and stuff like that. All our memorabilia is based around strikers. But one of our more famous guests was Howard Kendall. Howard lived by me in Formby, and every home game we used to pick him up, bring him out here. You've seen his chair in the corner. That's the original chairman's chair from the club's first form, and that we call Howard's Corner. We've got a guest book, and there's all kinds of people came in. I thought they came to see me. Obviously not. This guest book is full of autographs, and the day that Howard died is the day that people stopped coming in.
Today's main course, got a potato dauphinoise gratin, got a short rib of beef which has been braised for 5 hours, got a nice garnish of mushroom, smoked bacon, red wine.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Let's have a look at today's weather now.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The weather will remain cool and unsettled in the northwest over the coming days, but high pressure building in the south will bring warm sunshine for many. Temperatures will rise day on day with the potential of seeing 30 Celsius by the end of the week. This morning, early mists and fog over southwestern parts will clear to brighter skies. For much of the country, it'll be a dry, sunny start to the day after a mild night. Fair weather cloud will bubble up through the morning, but it'll be warm with temperatures topping 20 Celsius for many and peaking at 26 Celsius in the south. That's 79 Fahrenheit.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll discuss the stories making news today. Mari's back with the news review.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters. We love Trump! I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor, free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Welcome back. Time now for our news review. Mari's back for that. Mari, we're going for one of yours first, The Telegraph, and in particular, NHS drugs to become more expensive under US trade deal.
Yes, so this is interesting because we've talked a lot about this US trade deal. That deadline is looming near the beginning of July, when that should be over the line. Government sources tell us that they're confident it's going to be done and dusted by that deadline, if not before. It's all very positive in terms of the mood music. But interestingly, there appears to be perhaps some knock-on effects on the price of our medicines in the UK. So, Telegraph is reporting that potentially we could end up paying more for US drugs, US-made drugs, as part of this trade deal. So the NHS is reviewing the drug pricing to take into account the concerns of President Donald Trump. White House sources have told The Telegraph that they are expecting the NHS to pay higher prices for American drugs in an attempt to boost the interests of corporate America. And on the other side, they've got a Westminster source saying there's an understanding that we can look at the drug pricing issues. And what's really interesting is The Telegraph has also learnt that under the terms of the trade deal with America, the UK, has agreed to take fewer Chinese drugs in a clause similar to the veto given to Donald Trump over Chinese investment in Britain. And there's a concern amongst US officials that the price of drugs is somewhat similar to defence spending in terms of the fact that they think they're getting a raw deal. So they are horrified by the amount they pay for medicines in comparison to other countries like us and other European countries as well. And so that has been raised as an issue when it comes to these negotiations. And there are some concerns about whether this therefore increases the US involvement in the UK health sector, and there's always a concern around that.
Before we get to next papers, just want to bring you some breaking news. It's a readout from a Downing Street spokesperson about a bilateral meeting that the Prime Minister's had during the course of this last evening, albeit it's very late there in Canada, but must have taken place in the last few hours, with Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. And the readout says that they discussed the situation in the Middle East and that the Prime Minister urged restraint and de-escalation. They discussed the devastating human toll as well as the potential global economic impact caused by rising global oil prices. And they said that the summit, the G7 summit, that of course will be taking place from this morning, Canadian time, of course it's about 2 a.m. there at the moment, comes at a vitally important moment for the world, and that G7 partners must find a way forward through diplomacy. They reiterated their enduring support for Ukraine, and they also had a lengthy discussion on migration, confirming they would continue working together on innovative solutions to break the criminal model of irregular migration. And we will bring you more on that. But it's, nearly 2 a.m., Mari, in Canada. And no doubt this must have taken place, therefore, a good few hours ago. But he'll be having a lot of both bilats and then the group gatherings to come in the coming hours today.
Yeah, absolutely. There've been talk about sanctions, for instance, on Russia, further sanctions on Russia around the conflict in Ukraine, for instance. And we got some lines coming out overnight from him talking about the possibility of kind of squeezing the regime in Russia, and whether it's time to kind of increase that pressure. Of course, the Middle East will come up in those discussions as well, undoubtedly. Talks with Canada, for instance, around trade and trade deals. Could we see a trade agreement with Canada? There's so much on the agenda.
I mean, what I'd just say from the US perspective, of course, is that the focus of this meeting is the fact that President Trump is going to Canada. And Mark Carney, of course, new Prime Minister, will be welcoming him. So the mood music around that will be fascinating. And actually, it might be quite helpful for Prime Minister Carney that he has some other leaders probably sympathetic to his point of view on it. And we'll just see what comes out of it. I think, well, like any meeting that President Trump has, it's pretty fascinating to watch. But also helpful for Mark Carney to be hosting something like this so soon in his tenure and put him on that kind of global pedestal in a significant way. Now, in that readout, by the way, between Meloni and Starmer, mentioned the potential impact on oil prices of the conflict in the Middle East. I've gone with that in the FT, Mario. Back to the news review. Oil surge adds uncertainty for a divided BOE. This is a really good write-up of the potential factors that the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, will be considering this week. Of course, Bank of England decision coming on Thursday. Nobody expects another rate cut. We just had one. We've, of course, had 4 in the last year. We just had one last month. So most people expect this to be a 8-1, possibly 7-2 vote to hold, albeit with expectations of another rate cut maybe to come as soon as August. It's just this one sort of comes so soon between 2 other meetings. There's a couple of factors that could have pointed to a cut otherwise, most notably a tick up in unemployment and a disappointing GDP data. But you add to it a little bit of an oil surge, albeit too recent to really influence them in this meeting and not yet prolonged enough or lasting enough to be something that they should consider. And it just sort of confirms expectations in the market that they won't cut this month. But what it snapshots is the ongoing difficult position that the government finds themselves in, which is as soon as they sort of feel like they've solved for one problem and create a little bit of headroom here, anything can pop its head up and limit the headroom that she has or limit the GDP growth that she gets or boost the inflation that she has to face. And a reminder of that as the Bank of England focus their minds this week on Thursday.
Totally. And I think this is the difficulty that a lot of Rachel Reeves's critics have said. The fact that she's given herself so little headroom in 2 consecutive fiscal events means that she is therefore more easily bashed around politically by global events, which obviously is therefore a danger.
We haven't got long left, but we can rush through another one. Lack of legal help denied Windrush scandal survivors bigger payout you've gone for in The Guardian.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So what's really interesting about this is the difference between the payouts when those who were, wrongly either deported or wrongly threatened with deportation, etc., in comparison to when they get legal advice. And the reason I think this is really interesting is because the post office victims and the infected blood victims, they get legal advice from the government as part of the scheme, but the Windrush scheme doesn't have that. And so it's an exception in comparison to some of these kind of political scandals. And so let me show you the difference here. They've had a review of some of these applications, 17 applications. One person was awarded £300 and then they got legal advice and that went up to £170,000. One person was refused altogether. Then they got legal advice and they got £295,000. Somebody else was told they were going to get nothing. They got £95,000. Somebody else said they were going to get £10,000. It went up to £150,000. So clearly there is a massive difference between when you apply essentially by yourself with very little ability in terms of, legal frameworks, and then you get a lawyer involved. And a lot of these lawyers are actually working for free. So they're pro bono lawyers who are doing this essentially out of the goodness of their own heart because they feel that some of these people are clearly not being given the money that they actually deserve. And what's interesting is, some of these people, for instance, there's a guy here whose pseudonym is Jerome. He wasn't allowed to work for 17 years because he didn't have a passport. He lost it, in the 70s and never got a new one, never thought he needed one. Couldn't find a job, and he then went up, finally got a massive settlement, but again, because of legal advice. So it's just quite stark to show, actually, when you help people understand the law and what they're entitled to, how much it changes.
Really fascinating, that. I'm glad we touched on that. We've only got 45 seconds left. I'm just going to flag this one rather than dive into it, but it's an op-ed from our very own Sir Trevor Phillips. Keir Starmer should never say never again. Constant U-turns, most lately over an inquiry into grooming gangs, make the PM appear feckless. He should be bold. That's a comment piece from Sir Trevor today in The Times. Well worth reading. And it's a topic that's going to come up, no doubt, when we speak to the government at 7:15. We will be discussing, everything in the news with Emma Reynolds, the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, but including that U-turn on whether or not to hold a national statutory inquiry into grooming gangs. Mari and I will be back after this very short break. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live. Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Good morning. It's 7 o'clock on today's show. Donald Trump calls on Israel and Iran to make a deal as the conflict intensifies.
Plus, police launch a nationwide investigation to target grooming gangs.
It is Monday, the 16th of June. Your headlines. 5 killed and more than 70 injured as Iranian rockets hit Israel.
A massive barrage of Iranian missiles were aimed at Israel shortly after 4 a.m. this morning. Rescue workers are trying to recover people from under the rubble.
Iran says that more than 200 people have been killed in Israeli attacks since Friday. The crisis is set to dominate the agenda for the leaders at the G7 summit in Canada. Also ahead, Minnesota police arrest double murder suspect Vance Bolter over the killing of a Democrat politician and her husband. And Meghan shares a Father's Day tribute to Prince Harry. Very good morning to you. It's been another night of destruction in the Middle East. The conflict between Israel and Iran is intensifying, with both sides launching more strikes. US President Donald Trump has called for them to do a deal. But Iran says it will not negotiate while it's under attack, and there's no sign that Israel is ready to stop. Five people have been killed by Iranian rocket strikes overnight in central Israel. And emergency medical teams have been deployed to residential buildings at several sites across Israel, which were severely damaged. Let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who joins us now from Jerusalem. Ali, great to have you with us. Just sum up the scale of what happened overnight and I guess how it's been received there in Jerusalem itself.
Well, we don't have the exact figures for how many Iranian ballistic missiles were fired at Israel. That will probably come out a bit later from the IDF. What I can say is it was in one wave, about 4:20 in the morning, so reasonably late on, and just the single wave. In previous nights, there's been multiple waves, but this was clearly not just a pretty heavy barrage, but from an Iranian point of view, an effective one as well. Multiple impact sites, rumours that the oil depot up near Haifa has been hit. A number of impacts around the Tel Aviv area as well. 5 killed, the latest number's 90 injured. Rescue workers still looking for people trapped under the rubble in a number of those locations. So for yet another morning, what's that, the fourth morning in a row, Israelis are waking up to discover the damage of the rockets that have come in overnight. And then the bigger, wider picture, the Israeli attacks continue on Iran. They've really continued relentlessly, targeting all manner of sites within Iran itself. Of course, there's been a focus on nuclear facilities and military capabilities like the ballistic missile arsenal that Iran has, and personnel, nuclear scientists, key military figures. But over the weekend, we saw that expand to also include parts of national infrastructure like gas depots, oil refineries, that kind of thing as well. And then from the wider world, there are still calls for de-escalation. I have to say, I see no sign of that happening at the moment, and I don't think Israel's in a mood to step it back at all, despite the consequences it's facing for its attacks. And we're getting pretty mixed messages from the one person who really might have some influence over this, the US president. On the one hand, he's saying that there should be a ceasefire and the two sides should find a truce. And then he's also saying that actually maybe the two just need to be left to fight it out, which I think were comments he made overnight. And then there are also rumours that the Americans might even consider getting involved in the war as well. So it's really unclear exactly what the position of the Americans is right now.
Ali, just remind us in the last year or two what the UK has done to aid the broad situation in the region or to aid Israel as a whole. And I guess in particular, I'm talking about using British military assets, RAF assets, to intercept attacks. Has that been done specifically with Iranian missiles in the last year or two? And I guess it raises the question as to why not again now if it's been done before?
So back in April of last year, when the first Iranian attacks on Israel happened, there was quite a lot of forewarning given. Not publicly, but subsequently when I've spoken to foreign ministers, for example, around the region, they say they knew 3 or 4 days ahead that Iran was planning an attack on Israel. And so it was a bit more symbolic, but it allowed time for a coalition to be formed. Obviously the Israelis, the Americans, the French and the British, but also a sort of an informal coalition of Arab states as well. And so when those Iranian attacks happened, that kind of coalition was in place to help defend Israel. But also the nature of the attack in April 24 was slightly different. They fired first a wave of drones, then a wave of cruise missiles, then a wave of ballistic missiles. So the role of the British on that occasion, and the Americans, was predominantly shooting down the drones heading towards Israel, which allowed then the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli military to sort of focus on trying to bring down the ballistic missiles. I think the Americans have got the technology in F-35 jets, or at least they're developing it, to fire down ballistic missiles from aircraft. But if they do, it's very rare technology. So you have to really resort instead to your ground-based interceptor systems. And for the Israelis, that's the Arrow system. There's also an American THAAD system based in Israel as well. And they ideally carry out what's called exo-atmospheric interception. So basically, it's a hit-to-kill system where an interceptor missile will just slam straight into an incoming ballistic missile outside of the Earth's atmosphere. And we've been seeing that happening, and you see these actually quite incredible sort of rings of light when that happens, 100 kilometers up in the sky, outside of the Earth's atmosphere. But when that's not successful, ballistic missiles travel incredibly fast. We're not sure whether or not the Iranians have been or can use hypersonic ballistic missiles, but they are very hard to bring down. The Israelis say they've not seen any sign of these missiles being able to maneuver as they come down towards Earth. I mean, that would be a very hard thing to be able to shoot down. I think that's the sort of thing the Russians have been trying to use in Ukraine. But essentially, therefore, what the British could provide, in my understanding, to protect Israel if they wanted to, is somewhat limited. I mean, they could provide assets in other areas like air-to-air refueling, something that the Israelis don't have in huge numbers, which would allow Israeli aircraft to stay up in the air, maybe to attack targets in Iran or to do combat air patrols. They could provide that. They could also provide a certain amount of intelligence from the bases like the G6Q outpost in Cyprus. So there are things that the British could do to help the Israelis if that is a decision taken by Keir Starmer. But so far, that is not the case as we understand it.
Ali, as always, thanks so much. Stay safe. Ali Bunker there for us live in Jerusalem. Well, the Israeli military say it's targeted Iran's surface-to-surface missile sites in the centre of the country. The state-owned Iranian news agency Tasnim also reports that the head of the country's intelligence agency and his deputy were killed in Israeli strikes. And the Iranian Foreign Ministry in Tehran has been attacked too. Speaking exclusively to Sky News, the Iranian ambassador to the UK, Saeed Al-Musavi, said Israel's actions were violating international law and that Iran was acting in self-defense.
United Nations Charter, this is our inherent right to self-defense. Now we are defending ourselves according to the Charter of United Nations. There is no doubt that the one act of aggression has been placed against the Iranian territory. And according to this principle, this is the very important principle and in United Nations Charter and as well as international law, that to defend ourselves. There is no doubt that we are very firm into defending ourselves and regarding for all of the activities and reactions against the Israeli regime activities, all of them has been doing in the framework of legitimate right and inherent rights of self-defense.
Meanwhile, international leaders are gathering at the G7 summit in Canada today, with the conflict in the Middle East likely to dominate proceedings. Sky's US correspondent James Matthews has this update for us from Calgary.
So many moving parts to this, so many strands, and of course so many elements of unpredictability about all this. And that, of course, is the hazard, the risk in the region, the risk for all of us. So only Donald Trump, perhaps, could be seeking credit and bemoaning a lack of credit at a time when the Middle East is on fire. The fact that we are where we are is largely down to a failure in the American process. They have been negotiating with Iran. And for all Donald Trump is talking about a deal, elsewhere on social media, he invoked trade with the United States as the silver bullet that could solve all of this. You have to ask the question, well, where has trade featured? Why has that not been front, centre and successful in the negotiations over an extended period between US and Iran, their collapse has brought us to where we are today. They have not succeeded in reining in Iran's nuclear ambitions. I'm at the G7 summit. Keir Starmer, he comes here talking about the importance of de-escalation, as do all the key players who are gathering here. But of course, they sit down with Donald Trump, who's something of a rogue in the context of the G7. At the last time it sat here in Canada, he left and ripped up the communique on the plane on his way out. You know, the G7 body is typically sharing of a common purpose and would seek typically a common way forward on Israel, Iran. That will be awkward with Donald Trump, who of course has his own agenda.
James Matthews there for us. Much more to come from the G7 over the course of the day from James and from Beth, who's there as well. Now, a national inquiry into criminal grooming gangs will be announced today. Mari's here to tell us more about the details of this. And Mari, this is a significant change of heart from the government.
Absolutely. It's a massive U-turn. Over the weekend, we saw the Prime Minister say that there was going to be a national inquiry after the government for a very long time saying they weren't going to do that. They said that they were doing several local-led inquiries. Instead, that was the best case of action. And those, like the Tories, for instance, who were calling for it, were kind of jumping on a bandwagon or perhaps even, trying to appease the far right. Now, as you say, a bit of a change of tune. So what we're expecting today is Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is going to be giving a statement to the House of Commons on this. When she's given that statement, we will then see the Baroness Casey review published. And then we can really start to get into the weeds of what she's found just so far as a review, obviously not even the inquiry. We are expecting the review to say a few things. So first of all, to say that white British girls were institutionally ignored for fear of racism. Second, there's going to call a decade, a lost decade, between essentially the J Review, which was commissioned in 2014, and now. And that review was specifically around grooming gangs in Rotherham. And what we're also expecting it to say is we're expecting it to make a link between illegal immigration and the exploitation of young girls. That, more controversial, but, many people, especially I think in the Conservative Party, would argue it needs to be out in the air. We need to understand it. We need to talk about it. So there's going to be a nationwide police operation to track down perpetrators. Over 800 historic cases have already been reopened, and the National Crime Agency is looking into other cases that were not previously pursued that could potentially be opened. So we could see more than 800 in the end. Yvette Cooper's been saying that not enough people listened to the victims at the time, that it was wrong and unforgivable, and now it's going to change. But as we were saying, the difficulty is that the Conservative Party were calling for this, and obviously, the Reform Party as well, for quite some time. Criticism of them is that why didn't they do it when they were in power? But nonetheless, it looks like Labour is having to essentially turn back to the position that the Tories were calling for several months ago, which isn't politically very helpful.
Really, really fascinating, Mari. Thank you very much for that. It's something we're definitely going to talk about with the government. Emma Reynolds joins us, by the way, in the next 5 minutes or so. In the meantime, let's get you up to speed on all of the day's other stories. The NHS app will soon allow you to sign up to clinical trials as part of the government's 10-year health plan. The aim is for patients to eventually be automatically matched to studies based on individual interests and health data. Over 50 Labour MPs have written a letter to the Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, asking for more time for scrutiny of the assisted dying bill in the House of Commons. A debate and vote on the proposed assisted dying legislation is set to go ahead in Parliament this Friday. Nearly 10,000 gender recognition certificates have been granted since they were introduced 2 decades ago. It comes after the Supreme Court's definition of sex ruling earlier this year. The increase reflects recent changes in the certification process. The man suspected of shooting a Democrat and her husband in Minnesota has been charged with murder after a 2-day manhunt. Vance Bolter's arrest came after authorities found a car they believe he was using in a rural area near the 57-year-old's home. Sky correspondent David Blevins has this report.
In custody. Double murder suspect Vance Bolter apprehended in a field late last night.
That's 48 hours that law enforcement involved in a complex and dangerous manhunt. Spent Father's Day away from their families to deliver justice for Melissa and Mark Hortman and their children who spent this Father's Day alone.
community stunned, gathering to pray and to remember. Former State Senator Melissa Hortman grew up here. She and her husband Mark were shot dead in what's been called a politically motivated assassination. Her party colleagues Matt and Erin are struggling to comprehend her violent death.
Feels like a bad dream. I woke up this morning and was like, okay, so that was real. And it's, hit me in waves, the grief and the anger and the sadness. And she was a leader. True definition of a leader.
It's going to be incumbent upon us as leaders to set a different tone, to set a different direction for our state and our country so that horrific tragedies like this never occur again.
State Senator John Hoffman and his wife had been shot and wounded. Police sent to check on his party colleague didn't get there in time. They exchanged fire with a gunman disguised as a police officer, but he escaped, sparking a manhunt. Friends say Melissa Hortman's children feared for their mother's life after reading posts online. Her death exemplifies an alarming rise in political violence, fueled by divisive rhetoric. But outside this state capital, they are united in their grief and in their hope for an end to gun violence in America. David Blevins, Sky News in Minneapolis.
Right, time to talk to the government now. Delighted to say that Emma Reynolds has joined me here, Economic Secretary to the Treasury. A very good morning to you, Minister. Thanks for joining us. Let's start, if we can, with the situation in the Middle East. I guess the headline question is what space there is for any diplomacy and what role the UK might play in that.
Well, our priority is to de-escalate the situation. The Prime Minister has spoken to French, German and obviously President Trump leaders around the world and, as you'll have seen in the news, also the Italian Prime Minister as well as the Canadian Prime Minister. He's in Canada at the moment. He's also spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu and he is urging de-escalation. We're urging both sides to step back because the escalation of the situation is in nobody's interest.
I guess British assets, RAF assets based in Cyprus, were used in the course of the last couple of years to help intercept missiles headed towards Israel. Is that on the cards again or not?
Well, we haven't been involved in any of the Israeli action. And we are, as I say, the priority now for us, and has been since Friday, is to urge both sides to show restraint.
Are we available to Israel if they need us or not?
I can't comment on operational matters. What I think has been in the news is that we have sent jets and we have assets, we have personnel, we have a duty to protect personnel in the region, but I'm not going to get into specifics or details. You'll understand why.
Yeah, I guess it's the principal point of, is Israel still considered a very clear ally of ours? And if they have the right to defend themselves, which the Prime Minister has said himself, do they also have a legitimate expectation that an ally would be there to help them defend themselves if called upon?
Well, as I've said, we haven't been involved in any of the Israeli action. We are urging restraint on both sides. We think there should be a diplomatic resolution to this situation. Of course, we share the concerns around the role of Iran in the region. It is a greatly destabilising presence in the Middle East. We don't want Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. That can't be allowed to happen. But we want these things to be done through diplomatic means, not through the action that we're seeing.
Clearly, last week, I'm sure it was a busy week for you in the Treasury with the spending review. And now we're getting into the part where you start to sort of outline exactly where some of these investments go. What are you announcing today?
So we're announcing today a structures fund worth £1 billion, which is part of a broader package that we'll talk about later this week when we publish our 10-year infrastructure strategy. The structures fund today is £1 billion, 590 million of which is additional money going into the Lower Thames crossing, which has long been a problem and has been on the cards for many, many years. But we've got to get that across the line because the congestion at the Dartmouth tunnel is really causing a lot of delays. And also we're going to be repairing and renewing 3,000 bridges and other infrastructure across the country.
£1 billion, obviously, relatively small in the grand scheme of things. Are there much bigger announcements coming later in the week?
Well, yes, so this is part of a bigger package of over £700 billion in infrastructure, and there'll be further details later this week. But it's in addition to some of the transport infrastructure that we talked about, investment that we talked about last week and the week before. So over £15 billion for city regional transport networks, and a further over £2 billion into local transport as well. So it's in addition to some of those that we've been talking about in the spending review.
I want to talk about the decision to now announce a national statutory inquiry into the grooming gangs issue. I guess just stepping back from all of it, in retrospect, does the Cabinet, does the Prime Minister, I guess, regret the scale with which he and the government pushed back against having this sort of inquiry 6 months or so ago?
Our priority since we've been in government is to deliver justice as quickly as possible to the victims of grooming gangs. And that's why in January, the Home Secretary ordered every police force in the country to review investigations into grooming gangs. And thanks to that action, over 800 cases have now been reopened, and we've ordered the National Crime Agency to follow those up. Baroness Casey, when she first looked at this, when we asked her to do this rapid review, that the report of which will be published later today, didn't think we needed an additional national inquiry in addition to the local inquiries that we're supporting the establishment of, but has since found that there are gaps and that there is a role for a national inquiry in coordinating those local inquiries and compelling people to give evidence. But the priority, as I said, of the government is to take concrete action, to have a proper plan, and to make sure that those recommendations from Alexis Jay aren't just sat in a report on a shelf somewhere like they were left to do when the last government was in power. She reported in 2022, and none of those 20 recommendations were taken forward by the last government. We're already legislating for and taking forward some of the recommendations of the Jay review.
I mean, you're not going to find any pushback from me in terms of pointing out how long these reviews can take and how slow the action has been across multiple governments. But you know, and I get that facts change, and Baroness Casey may have changed her view on it, and the government might be following that. But equally, then, is it not regretful to have framed some of those who called for the type of inquiry you're now putting in place, to frame them as amplifying what the far right is saying? Is it worth acknowledging that that rhetoric was a mistake?
Well, Jess Phillips, as you know, the Safeguarding Minister, has been subject to a vile abuse. And the comments that the Prime Minister made about Conservative politicians was, frankly, our frustration that for many years, from 2022 to the time of the last election, those same politicians did nothing with those recommendations. They didn't take a single recommendation forward. And our priority as a government is to act as quickly as possible to bring those perpetrators to justice and to stop this from happening again.
That's completely fair enough. And if you go back to January, February, I think on this programme you'd see me pushing pretty hard against any Tory who tried to claim that they would have acted quicker when the track record said otherwise. But that's not what I'm asking about. And with due respect, you're kind of avoiding the point. The Prime Minister said that the people calling for a national inquiry, whether they're Tory, Reform, not in politics, a victim, or anything, he said that they're amplifying what the far right is saying. Was that a mistake to say that?
Well, if you look at his comments in context, he was
I'll
talking
read it in full.
about...
Shall I read it in full? He said, what I won't tolerate is politicians jumping on the bandwagon simply to get attention when those politicians sat in government for 14 long years, tweeting, talking, but not doing anything about it. Now so desperate for attention that they're amplifying what the far right is saying. That final sentence quite clearly suggests that anyone wanting a national inquiry is far right.
Well, I haven't
You can also criticise the lack of action of the previous government. This is a separate point. Essentially, if you're not criticising what the Prime Minister said back then, you're now the far right for implementing a national inquiry.
I don't think that is the implication of what he said. He also said, and I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but he also said at Prime Minister's question time in January, and I remember him saying it, that there were legitimate views on both sides of this debate, reasonable people who wanted a national inquiry and reasonable people who didn't want a national inquiry, but both wanted to get justice for the victims, and indeed the victims' families sat on both sides of that debate. That's something that he said back then, and there are reasonable people on both sides of this debate. The tension here is how you make sure that we forge ahead quickly and not waste any more time so that we can actually get to the truth of what happened, deliver justice for the victims and prevent this from happening again. That's what we're all really focused on in government, and we need a proper plan to do that. We are listening to Baroness Casey. We asked her to do a rapid review, not a long review, a rapid review, and the report will be published later today. We think it's better to listen to her. She's got great expertise in these matters, and we've agreed with her recommendation that there should be a national inquiry, but not the same type of national inquiry that Baroness J did, but a different sort of inquiry that coordinates the local inquiries, fills the gaps and compels people to give evidence. But we don't want to wait another 7 long years until we actually do anything, which is why in January we took action and we continue to take action. We've got the Crime and Policing Bill in Parliament as we speak, which is making sure that one of the recommendations of the J Review, that it says duty on anybody who knows of any child sexual exploitation and abuse, that they should report that mandatory reporting. That is something that the last government could have done quite quickly in 2022 and failed to do so. So it's important that we continue to take the action to follow the recommendations of the J Review, but that we also work really closely with Baroness Casey, and further details will be set out by the Home Secretary later today in Parliament.
We look forward to following those details in the announcement. Emma Reynolds, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you as always. We've got some breaking news. Israeli Army Radio has just reported that the number of people killed in last night's rocket attack by Iran has risen to 8. We'll get you more on that when we have it. There's another bit of breaking news just coming in. It's being reported by Reuters, citing local media reports, that an Air India, Boeing 7878 Dreamliner from Hong Kong was forced to return after the pilot reported technical issues in mid-air. India's aviation regulator ordered additional safety checks on Air India's Boeing 787 and 787-9s fleet after last week's crash, which killed at least 270 people. We'll get you more on that as well as soon as we have it. But for now, we're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. When we come back, we'll have Sam and Anne.
Turkey is burying its dead. Whole families died in this collapse.
generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. We'll be talking to Sam and Anne in just a moment. But first, let's remind you of all of the day's top stories. Israel says 8 people have died and more than 70 have been injured in overnight strikes by Iran. Explosions have been seen in central Tehran as the two countries trade strikes for a 4th day. A man suspected of shooting dead a US politician and her husband and wounding 2 others in Minnesota has been arrested. Barnes Bolter was detained following a 2-day manhunt after Melissa and Mark Hortman were killed in their home on Saturday. The Prime Minister's arrived in Canada for a meeting of the world's wealthiest nations. Sir Keir Starmer says the conference is an opportunity for leaders to have a broad conversation about global security in a constructive way as the conflict between Israel and Iran continues to escalate. A nationwide police operation to track down those in grooming gangs has been announced by the Home Office. It comes ahead of the release of a government-commissioned rapid review into the scale of grooming gangs across the country, due to be published today. Well, conflict in the Middle East that's sure to dominate the agenda at the G7 summit taking place in Canada. Ahead of the meeting, Sir Keir Starmer called for de-escalation. Let's talk about that and all of the week's other major political stories. Joining me now, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, and our Executive Editor at Politico, Anne McElvoy. A very good morning to you both. I'm sad you're not here in studio, but nonetheless, great to see you both. Why don't we, in fact, start, Sam, with the grooming gangs announcement and not just the significance of the fact that this national statutory inquiry is now in the works or will be confirmed later today, but exactly how the government is framing making this decision now versus not having made it previously, and your take on all of that.
Well, look, I think it is a difficult moment for Keir Starmer. It was barely 6 months ago that he was saying that those calling for a national inquiry were effectively giving oxygen to the far right. He seemed quite determined to resist a national inquiry. What he did instead was to set up 5 local inquiries in places like Oldham. But there were all sorts of problems with those inconsistencies of the definition of what grooming actually meant. The fact that they didn't have statutory powers, so you couldn't necessarily rely on these inquiries getting to the bottom of what police, child protection and other agencies did wrong. And now, off the back of this report by Louise Casey, 200-page report that's going to be out later today, he has used that to say he's doing a U-turn. But there were so many others, including in his own government, that thought this is where he'd end up. There is a question of why the Prime Minister himself didn't see that earlier.
And in terms of the kind of U-turn or not U-turn debate and how the government deals with it, is this a real problem, or are we making it into one? And is there a kind of glimpse here of whether the government should be kind of taking a lesson from whether it's the winter fuel payments kind of U-turn and not framing it as one or accepting it as one to this? Are they learning as they go or not?
Well, I think you have to hope they're learning as they go, but we are getting quite a lot of 180-degree turns in rapid succession. We seem to start the week quite often talking to you about them in one guise or another, Will. And I think this story, if you like, about the national inquiry and the fact that it took them so long to get there, as Sam says, it is an interesting question and a critical question that I think Keir Starmer should ask himself, as so many people thought that this was inevitable. I think there was also a degree degree of fear about having a national inquiry, to be blunt about it. I think Keir Starmer knew that he didn't handle the emotional tone after the dreadful killings of the little girls in Southport well, and that I think he was rather sort of spooked by that. Also, the rise of reform, etc., can easily leverage dissatisfactions inside communities, and particularly the problem of Muslim communities where there is a very strong concentration of people living aside from their fellow white voters. So I think all of that was figured. I think probably once this gets underway, we will remember it in the Westminster bubble. But I think the public will be much more interested in what this inquiry is going to look at, what the terms of it are. And that, I think, is a Pandora's box for Labour. Labour has been in power in a lot of parts of the country locally where this abuse was rife. The evidence was there that it was across, not only in the north and northwest. And I think that will be, a lot of those areas where Labour has held power are going to look very critically at that. The record, not only of the last Conservative government, but certainly where this all began, or the first cases were in Rotherham way back, that obviously began in the Blair era. So I think you'll have criticism of the police and other agencies as well, and a general critical view of why was there such institutional bias, as Louise Casey puts it, against these vulnerable white girls.
Before we get on to talk about the Middle East and what might be said about it at the G7, and I just wanted to pause and talk about the significance of the G7 gathering as a whole, because it's got the German Chancellor attending, of course, the first big G7 gathering for him since becoming the leader of Europe's biggest economy. Equally, more importantly, it's got Donald Trump going to Canada, and it gives Mark Carney, a newly elected Prime Minister of Canada, the chance to sort of showcase his authority by hosting everyone. It's a pretty significant gathering.
It really is. I think this will be written about. It will be written about for many years and decades to come. You're absolutely right. It will be a memorable G7. You've got to see the Iran-Israel conflict, and the big question there at G7 will be, how is Donald Trump really, where is he going to settle on this? Because we know Donald Trump doesn't settle very readily on positions, as we've seen that around the Ukraine-Russia crisis. And he's hinted that America might get involved, but what are the terms of that? What would it take to trigger that? Would it be in his interest as a president who came in saying he was there to stop all these wars? He blamed his predecessor, Joe Biden, for either starting or getting involved with. So I think, you can see those images there. He looks like a bullish mode. He doesn't look absolutely at his happiest at G7. Maybe it's going to Canada that doesn't suit him so well. But for Mark Carney, of course, it's a great moment. It's Canada on the international stage. And for Keir Starmer, well, I think that's that tricky job. He's walking the line, keeping that relationship solid with the Trump administration to get the big, beautiful trade deal for the UK that never quite arrives, but is said to be imminent. Keep the state visit on track. But Keir Starmer has been more critical of Israel here than, for instance, Friedrich Merz from Germany, whose first principled statement was, we understand the threat to Israel from Iran. We stand by Israel at this difficult time, and then warned against escalation. Keir Starmer didn't go that far. If anything, he's been backing out of the room a bit on Israel in the last couple of weeks.
Sam, talk to us a little bit about, domestically, politically, the headache that the latest situation in the Middle East is. Not the primary concern, of course, of the situation in the Middle East, but nonetheless, it's a tough sort of act to balance now for the government, given some of those comments they've made towards the Israeli government of late.
I think there are two domestic kind of ramifications of what's going on. First of all, there is an unease in the Labour Party about the relationship and the approach of the UK government towards Israel. There are plenty of Labour MPs that would like it to be tougher, and this sort of coalesces around the debate around Palestinian statehood, something that was promised in the Labour manifesto, but doesn't sound like Keir Starmer is about to press the button on, certainly in terms of unilateral UK recognition of a Palestinian state. But there's a second, arguably bigger sort of domestic consequence of what's going on in the Middle East, and that is just the impact on the economy. Rachel Reeves was talking to our colleague Trevor Phillips yesterday. She said that there'd been a 10% increase in oil futures and the oil price as a result of the bombing between Israel and Iran over the last few days. Now, that will feed through into higher prices, higher inflation. That will put the squeeze onto her the public finances. It will reduce our headroom. It will make life more difficult. It will make life more expensive for voters. None of which is welcome. In an ultra-cynical world, it gives her a little bit more cover to raise taxes in the autumn, but that's something that she probably would have had to have done anyway. But now she's got a sort of an external thing that she can point to. But generally, the sense of the economy getting worse, I think, is, or not improving as much as she might have otherwise wanted it to, because of a protracted campaign in the Middle East, now with the dimension involving Iran in the last few days, is something that is just generally going to weigh on this government, and not something I think that will be particularly welcome.
So I'm really interested, Sam, that you mentioned that, because clearly it does increase pressure and it's an external factor on the country's finances. And we kind of touched on this over the last couple of months a few times. Liberation Day did the same thing. So isn't now the moment to seize, to come out and say, look, this might mean we have to increase taxes come autumn? And all of last week was another opportunity in and around the spending review where they could have started to lay the groundwork for that. By not using these big external factors to lay the groundwork, does it hurt them more if and when they do have to put taxes up?
Well, the story of Rachel Reeves' chancellorship is the story of somebody who continually boxes themselves in. So it was only last week that Rachel Reeves was insisting that there was nothing in the spending review that might mean that she has to increase taxes. So it would be pretty hard to come out this week to and do the precise opposite. But moreover, sort of in the system that she has herself created, she's left herself very little room for maneuver against her borrowing targets, the fiscal rules. I think this all comes to a head the next time the independent economic watchdog for government, the Office for Budget Responsibility, judges how much headroom, how much wiggle room is left. That will be in the autumn budget. That is the time where she almost certainly is going to have to come back and say, I need more money from somewhere in order to give myself more of a buffer. So I think that would be the logical moment to do it. Maybe over the summer they start sort of pitch rolling and laying the groundwork. But bluntly, Wilf, laying the groundwork and sort of pitch rolling is not something that this government has proved itself particularly skilled at.
And wanted to finish up asking you about the new head of the MI6. You know a little bit about her?
Well, yes, I do. It's really interesting there that we're seeing a new female head of MI6, also from a very different background in many ways to predecessors, obviously by virtue of being female, by virtue of being only 47 years old. She previously worked as Q, which anyone who knows the James Bond films, it does all the gadgets, the exploding pens and things, which I am absolutely assured that they don't. Picture of her there. I'm assured that they actually have exploding pens, which is a real disappointment. But I think that was also a real case where you had MI6 was hoping to get its own candidate in there, particularly as it turned out, probably in a sense prophetically, given what's happening in the Middle East. She's a Middle East expert and an Arabist by background. But also that there was some competition there from our present ambassador, Barbara Woodward, who is ambassador to Beijing. And I think that was the Foreign Office preference. Well, in this case, it seems that it was MI6 that won that argument. And it cannot be coincidental, both the technology knowledge of the now serving Q, who becomes M in the film version of all of this, but also that there is a strong Middle East background there, and I'm sure that will be seen as vital at the moment.
But I'm confused, Anne. I had this discussion earlier. She is going to be called C, not M.
Actually, we C when she gets the job. You'll see when you get the job, and you get a pen to write in green ink, which is very important.
In the James Bond movies, his boss and Q's boss is M, not C.
Oh gosh, well, yeah, no, I think that's interesting. Is that operational, or is that the chief of the service though? Because that's what it sort of comes down to. But basically, she is going to be the new chief, whichever letter you put on it. But Q is obviously, the role. still there until the autumn, with all the sort of AI is now the new exploding pens, if you see what I mean. But your knowledge of Ian Fleming has momentarily thrown me, and we will be back with serious analysis of MI6 shortly.
Well,
but
I'd be delighted.
basically, you become the chief, and the chief, you're right, historically with the M, but is the chief.
I'd be
so a lot of people
delighted
would
to
say
join that episode of the podcast when it relies on knowledge of fiction as opposed to facts. I'm happy to join you both. Great to see you both as always, albeit a shame not in person. Make sure to subscribe to Politics at Sam and Anne's if you haven't already. QR code on your screen right now. Right, a little bit of breaking news. A statement coming from the Foreign Secretary David Lammy. He says the first British fatalities in the devastating the plane crash, in India have now officially been confirmed. He says, my profound condolences to all in this moment of shared grief. We're working tirelessly on the ground to support British nationals and their families. So we will have more on that as and when the names and details are confirmed publicly, but clearly some of that detail certainly confirmed as far as the Foreign Office is concerned. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll have more on the appointment of Britain's first female spy chief. We'll be right back.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back. Rural crime has fallen across most of the UK, but not in Wales. Criminal gangs have targeted livestock, quad bikes and other agricultural machinery, costing farmers thousands of pounds. Sky's Dan Whitehead has this report for us.
This is the moment the farm's £10,000 quad bike was taken. 1 a.m, the thieves caught on a camera
normally used to monitor newborn calves.
As you can see here, we've got the calving camera on that back of the sheds.
It was the start of a spate of rural crime in West Wales last summer.
Since then, nearly 50 bikes have actually gone from the Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion area. So that was, every other day on Facebook you were seeing somebody posting that they'd lost a bike in the early hours of that morning. So yeah, it was just completely mad to see how many were going in this short space of time.
New figures out today show rural crime in the UK cost an estimated £44.1 million last year. That's actually a fall of around 16% compared to 2023. Wales is the only UK nation that's seen a rise, with rural crime up 18% in 2024 to £2.8 million. It's not just agricultural machinery that's being taken.
They spend most of the time on the common. There's 5,000 acres here.
In Pontypool, sheep farmer James says he's had around 200 of his flock taken over the last 4 years, costing him around £20,000.
The problem is our flock's been going since 1936, so it's a closed flock. I don't buy stock in, it's purely our own breeding. So when I lose stock, I'm not just losing the money side of it, I'm losing the breeding as well.
Police say they are increasing resources to tackle rural crime this year and issuing DNA kits to mark valuable equipment. Most police forces in England and Wales do have a dedicated rural crime team, but policing large, sparsely populated areas like this, often with little or no CCTV, can make bringing convictions difficult. It's understood criminal gangs are now using drones to recce target areas.
NFU Mutual works closely with the National Rural Crime Unit, and what we've found increasingly is that organised criminals are targeting certain areas of the countryside. So they're hitting multiple farms in one night, they're raiding them, they're moving away to another area and then hitting multiple farms there. So it is hugely concerning.
For James and other farmers, they are becoming repeat victims of rural crime. Another challenge for an industry already struggling to stay in business. Dan Whitehead, Sky News.
MI6 has named its first female head to lead the foreign spy agency, soon to be known as C. Blaise Metro-Welli will take the top job after more than 25 years across the security services. Amelia's here to tell us a little bit more the significance of this, but her background as well.
Yeah, well, this is the first time in 116 years that we have had a female lead MI6. And of course, you'll have heard of MI5 and MI6. Their roles are slightly different. MI6 is involved in countering international threats. MI5 is domestic threats. And Blaise Metro-Welli joined in 1999. She's currently the Director of Technology at MI6, known as Q. She was one of the directors at MI5, but is now obviously going to be head of MI6. And she's the 18th, or will be the 18th chief of the organisation, reporting to the Foreign Secretary. And she'll take over from Sir Richard Moore, who will step down later this year. But obviously I mentioned Q, the code name for her current role. She will then become C. Now, it's a common misconception that C stands for chief, but it actually doesn't, and it goes back to the 1900s. And the first spy agency for Britain was established then, and it was called the Secret Service Bureau, and it was led at the time by a Royal Naval officer, Captain Mansfield Cumming, and he always signed his letters with C. The code name then stuck, so now all heads of MI6 are codename C.
And she's pretty young to be taking this role as well.
Yes, she is. She's 47. She has worked across Europe and the Middle East as part of her kind of extensive background. But the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has called this historic. It's a crucial time, he said, for the UK's intelligence agencies, and to have a woman for the first time for him and for lots of people will be a great move.
Really, really interesting, Amelia. Great stuff. Thank you very much for that. Well, as we wrap up the hour, some uplifting photographs to look at. Prince William and his 3 children were seen in these photos released yesterday to celebrate Father's Day. This first image, of course, showing them posing, and this next one, the madness that unfolded after the pictures were being taken. 2 wonderful photos there released yesterday. Also, some wonderful videos released by the Duchess of Sussex, actually late last night, our time, from California, of course, to mark Father's Day for Prince Harry. The post from Meghan described him as, quote, the best, and it featured these little videos that we've never seen before of him playing with Archie and Lilibet. Very uplifting on both fronts.
I like the horse. The little horse in there.
Yeah, very
quite
sweet.
Nice.
Very sweet indeed. Well, very, very happy Father's Day to them both, and only sad that they celebrate the love there with their siblings, whilst theirs, of course, remains fractured between the two of them. Anyway, happy Father's Day to them both yesterday, and to anybody else celebrating Father's Day. Let's have a quick look at the weather.
The perfect climate, wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The weather will remain cool and unsettled in the northwest over the coming days, but high pressure building in the south will bring warm sunshine for many. Temperatures will rise day on day, with potential of seeing 30 Celsius by the end of the week. This morning, early mist and fog over southwestern parts will clear to brighter skies. For much of the country, it'll be a dry, sunny start to the day after a mild night. Fair weather could bubble up through the morning, but it will be warm, with temperatures topping 20 Celsius for many.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Lots to come on the Breakfast Show. Mari, from the Tories, we're joined by Chris Philp, Shadow Home, but also one of the people that specifically was trying to call for a grooming's scandal inquiry.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think realistically this morning when he's on the show with you, he will be saying he's been vindicated and that finally the Labour Party is following his lead when it comes to the grooming gang.
He will join us at 8:15. We'll be back after this short break with that and all of the day's other top stories.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. On today's show, Donald Trump calls on Israel and Iran to make a deal as the conflict intensifies.
Plus, police launch a nationwide investigation into targeting grooming gangs.
It's Monday, the 16th of June. Your headlines: 8 killed and more than 70 injured as Iranian rockets hit Israel.
A massive barrage struck Israel shortly after 4 a.m. this morning. Rescue workers are still trying to find people trapped under the rubble.
Iran says that more than 200 people have been killed in Israeli attacks since Friday. The crisis is set to dominate the agenda for the World Leaders Summit, the G7, in Canada. Also ahead, Minnesota police arrest double murder suspect Vance Bolter over the killing of a Democrat politician and her husband. And Meghan shares a Father's Day tribute to Prince Harry. A very good morning to you. It's been another night of destruction in the Middle East. The conflict between Israel and Iran is intensifying, with both sides launching more strikes. These are live pictures from central Israel showing the aftermath of the missile strike that Israeli army radios reporting killed 8 people, with further numbers either injured or missing. That is the central Israel live picture that we have for you. Let's bring in now our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle, who joins us live from Jerusalem. And Ali, just in that last hour, the death toll overnight has risen.
It has, and rescue workers are still working to try and find people they believe are trapped under the rubble. There was a barrage of Iranian missiles that hit Israel about 20 past 4 in the morning, some of them getting through and impacting in the sort of central Israel, Tel Aviv area, and some around Haifa as well. So that is kind of the news this morning. The death toll, I think, could potentially rise from that. I've been at the scene of impacts over the weekend. We'll go down and see them for ourselves later today. And it's not just, the particular direct impact site where there's major damage, but the shockwave from a missile strike also has a huge amount of damage to the buildings in the surrounding areas. And that's why you get a very high number of wounded as well. Israel's air defense systems are some of the best in the world, but they are not perfect. Even if they have a success rate of 90%, well, if Iran fires 100 ballistic missiles, as it often does, well, that means 10 of those aren't shot down. And if only 1 or 2 of them hit residential buildings, as they have been doing, that is how you can quite quickly get a very high casualty toll. Israel is continuing to attack Iran pretty much relentlessly. Over the weekend, we've seen them widen the scope of the targets. The nuclear facilities have sort of been the priority, as well as the ballistic missile launching sites, to try and prevent Iran from attacking Israel. We've seen them targeting nuclear scientists as well, key Iranian military personnel, but also now oil refineries and gas depots as well, targeting Iran's major national infrastructure.
Ali, as always, thanks so much. Much appreciated, Ali Bunkle there in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, let's bring in now Lieutenant Colonel Golan Landsberg. He's a former team leader with the IDF's Search and Rescue Unit. Thanks so much for joining us, Lieutenant Colonel. What is your assessment of the overnight attacks on Israel?
Well, first, thank you for having me. We had another, I would say, rough night in terms of civilian casualties. In the state, we have an incoming attack from Iran over our civil towns and citizens, and it's been a rough morning with the family being killed. It's looked like we have a little break now.
What's your assessment of this death toll that we've been reporting on, according to IDF military radio? 8, might it rise?
I don't want to get into the exact numbers of casualties at this point. I would just say that I was witness to at least few in a high-rise building in one of our major cities in the center of the country.
As the former head of the IDF Search and Rescue Unit, I mean, was your work predominantly overseas as opposed to domestic?
We do both. Israel has well-established reputation of helping others when there is a need. But my first and foremost important duty is to serve the civilian population of Israel, and this is what I predominantly do.
What I guess I'm getting at is, it seems rare to me, perhaps I'm wrong, but to see scenes like this domestically in major cities in Israel.
Yeah, this is something extreme. You know, I've been through the world in many areas that were hit by different types of catastrophes. Seeing that in your home country is never easy, but this is what we need to withstand and go through to fight for the safety of our nation.
Is there fear that this is going to get a lot worse?
I don't think so. I think we have defense and offense. Our offense effort show success, and on the offense side, we are well prepared. My team and other teams in Israel, our aerial protection layers do a very good job. So I don't think it's going to be easier, but I don't think it will get worse.
Colonel Landsberg, thanks so much for joining us. We do appreciate it. We're going to hear more on this topic throughout the morning, including from the former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, at 8:30. And we'll also get the view from Tehran as well. International leaders are gathering at the G7 summit in Canada today, with the conflict in the Middle East likely to dominate proceedings. Sky's US correspondent James Matthews has this update for us from Calgary.
So many moving parts to this, so many strands, and of course so many elements of unpredictability about all this. And that, of course, is the hazard, the risk in the region, the risk for all of us. So only Donald Trump, perhaps, could be seeking credit and bemoaning a lack of credit at a time when the Middle East is on fire. The fact that we are where we are is largely down to a failure in the American process. They have been negotiating with Iran, and for all Donald Trump is talking about a deal, elsewhere on social media he invoked trade with the United States as the silver bullet that could solve all of this. You have to ask the question, well, where has trade featured? Why has that not been front, centre and successful in the negotiations over an extended period between US and Iran? Their collapse has brought us to where we are today. They have not succeeded in reining in Iran's nuclear ambitions. I'm at the G7 summit. Keir Starmer, he comes here talking about the importance of de-escalation, as do all the key players who are gathering here. But of course, they sit down with Donald Trump, who's something of a rogue in the context of the G7. At the last time it sat here in Canada, he left and ripped up the communique on the plane on his way out. You know, the G7 body is typically sharing of a common purpose and would seek typically a common way forward on Israel, Iran. That will be awkward with Donald Trump, who of course has his own agenda.
More from James and from Beth, both there at the G7 throughout the day here on Sky News. Now, a national inquiry into criminal grooming gangs will be announced today. Mari's here to talk us through the significance of this, both going forwards, but also with the framing that the government gave towards calls for one 6 months or so ago.
Yeah, exactly that. So originally the Labour Party position was that they didn't want to have a national inquiry. They felt that the best course of action would be to have several localised inquiries. They felt that that would deliver justice for the victims as quickly as possible and with kind of local expertise. Then they commissioned a quick review from Baroness Casey into this, and Turns out she's recommended a national inquiry. So essentially they've had to U-turn on this, and they are now going to announce that inquiry in the House of Commons. If people will do so today. And really what they're going to announce is that the National Crime Agency is going to work in tandem with the police to, first of all, look at historic cases, whether they can open up some more of those. They've already opened up over 800. And also they're wanting to look into, cracking down on perpetrators and seeing if they can bring them to justice. We are expecting the review to talk about three things that what we know so far. One is that it's expected to say white British girls were institutionally ignored for fear of racism. The second aspect is that they expect them to say there's been a lost decade since the J Review, which was launched into Rotherham grooming gangs in 2014. And also that we expect the review to make a link between illegal immigration and the sexual exploitation of young girls as well. You were speaking to Emma Reynolds just earlier on the programme, and she was trying to explain and justify Keir Starmer's language when he accused the Conservative Party of jumping on a political bandwagon and essentially kind of allowing or appeasing the far right, perhaps. And she also was talking about the abuse that Jess Phillips had received and trying to put some of the comments in context. I think we can have a listen to her arguments now.
Well, Jess Phillips, as you know, the Safeguarding Minister, has been subject to a vile abuse. And the comments that the Prime Minister made about Conservative politicians was, frankly, our frustration that for many years, from 2022 to the time of the last election, those same politicians did nothing with those recommendations. They didn't take a single recommendation forward. And our priority as a government is to act as quickly as possible to bring those perpetrators to justice and to stop this from happening again.
Well, that was Emma Reynolds earlier, and we'll get the Tories' response to this. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, joins us just shortly. By the way, we're also going to talk to the Rotherham MP, Sarah Champion, at 8:45, so lots more to come on that story. But for now, let's have a look at all of the day's other top stories. And the Foreign Secretary says the British fatalities from a plane crash in India have been confirmed. In a post on social media site X, David Lammy expressed his deep condolences, saying the government is working tirelessly on the ground to support British nationals and their families. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner bound for London Gatwick Airport crashed into a residential area shortly after takeoff on Thursday, killing 241 people on board and at least 29 on the ground. The NHS app will soon allow you to sign up to clinical trials as part of the government's 10-year health plan. The aim is for patients to eventually be automatically matched to studies based on individual interests and health data. Doctors have trialled a new treatment for leukemia that doesn't require chemotherapy. They found that more than 9 out of 10 patients were still alive and the disease had not returned 5 years later. It's been hailed as a milestone. The Duchess of Sussex shared a tribute to Prince Harry to mark the occasion, describing him as the best. The post featured never-before-seen footage of the Duke playing with his children, Archie and Lilibet. The man suspected of shooting a Democrat and her husband in Minnesota has been arrested and charged with murder after a 2-day manhunt. Sky's correspondent David Blevins has this report.
In custody. Double murder suspect Vance Bolter apprehended in a field late last night.
That's 48 hours that law enforcement involved in a complex and dangerous manhunt. Spent Father's Day away from their families to deliver justice for Melissa and Mark Hortman and their children who spent this Father's Day alone.
A community stunned, gathering to pray and to remember. Former State Senator Melissa Hortman grew up here. She and her husband Mark were shot dead in what's been called a politically motivated assassination. Her party colleagues Matt and Erin are struggling to comprehend her violent death.
Feels like a bad dream. I woke up this morning and was like, okay, so that was real. And it's, hit me in waves, the grief and the anger and the sadness. And she was a leader. True definition of a leader.
It's going to be incumbent upon us as leaders to set a different tone, to set a different direction for our state and our country so that horrific tragedies like this never occur again.
State Senator John Hoffman and his wife had been shot and wounded. Police sent to check on his party colleague didn't get there in time. They exchanged fire with a gunman disguised as a police officer, but he escaped, sparking a manhunt. Friends say Melissa Hortman's children feared for their mother's life after reading posts online. Her death exemplifies an alarming rise in political violence, fueled by divisive rhetoric. But outside this state capital, they are united in their grief and in their hope for an end to gun violence in America. David Blevins, Sky News in Minneapolis.
And more from David and the team in the US throughout the day here on Sky News. Right, time now to talk to the Conservatives. And delighted to say I'm joined by the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Are you pleased to see the statutory national inquiry into grooming gangs be announced?
Yes, we've been calling on this for about 6 months. And Keir Starmer has at last agreed. But he had to be dragged here kicking and screaming. He's not doing this because he wants to or because he believes in it. He's doing this because he was forced to, forced partly by the Casey report and partly by the vote that we have scheduled in Parliament on Wednesday. When this first came out, the need for a national inquiry into the cover-up in January, Keir Starmer smeared people like me and other campaigners. He claimed we were part of a far-right bandwagon. That is a disgraceful smear. And in fact, when he said that, Keir Starmer was essentially perpetuating the same attitude that led to the cover-up in the first place. So I hope Keir Starmer is going to apologise to campaigners for that disgraceful smear he tried in January. But it is good that he has at last been forced to adopt this inquiry.
I guess the first point just to acknowledge on this is you're saying he's been dragged into this decision 6 months late. You must acknowledge equally that your government didn't introduce this for 14 years previously.
Well, the last government did a lot. For example, initiating the Rotherham inquiry back in 2014, the independent inquiry into child sex abuse that was much wider but did cover this, that ran for 7 years. Sajid Javid started collecting ethnicity data in about 2018, and then Rishi Sunak established the Grooming Gangs Task Force, which led to 550 arrests. Now, what then happened after the election is Oldham Council said, look, we can't investigate this ourselves. We need a national inquiry, including into the cover-up. Now, the Labour government contemptuously dismissed that request by Oldham Council, and that became public in January, and that is when the campaign really began. Look,
I think it's very legitimate to criticise some of the framing of why an inquiry wasn't held over 6 months ago, and to say that perhaps this could have happened quicker on the last government. For you, essentially, what I'm hearing, the only legitimate excuse you have for not introducing a statutory national inquiry is that Oldham Council hadn't called for it yet.
Well, as I said, there were a whole load of things done by the previous
I get that, but you
government.
weren't, when you were in government, as a junior minister or a senior minister in various different roles, calling for one then. And then the day the election passes, you change your tune. Essentially, you're saying the only difference is that Oldham Council called for it. As a government, you could have done this yourselves earlier.
Well, just to be clear, I wasn't the Home Secretary and I wasn't the safeguarding minister.
Your government...
And it was only when this call by Oldham Council, and I only became Shadow Home Secretary in November.
Fine. You're here to speak for your party as a whole.
Yeah, and look, and within a few weeks of becoming Shadow Home Secretary, when Oldham Council's request became public, because Labour didn't mention it for a number of months, then we looked at what they were saying, what Oldham Council was saying, and the view that I reached as the new Shadow Home Secretary, and the view that Kemi Badenoch reached as the new leader of the Conservative Party, is that a statutory inquiry was necessary to get to the bottom of the cover-up. And what I've heard in the last few months, meeting retired police officers and meeting survivors, and what has really shocked me, has been the way that this was deliberately covered up over years and possibly decades. It wasn't that people were just negligent or just didn't sort of look into it properly. They deliberately and actively covered it up. And I'm talking about senior police officers, local council leaders, social services, the Crown Prosecution Service. And the reason they deliberately covered it up for years was because the victims were mainly very young white girls, often from troubled backgrounds, from care homes and so on. whereas the perpetrators were mainly of Pakistani heritage, and people in authority at the time were more concerned about so-called race relations than they were about protecting young girls. That is absolutely disgusting, frankly. Not a single one of those people has been held to account. There's a criminal offence called misconduct in public office, and I think those people, and I'm not talking about a handful, it's probably dozens or maybe hundreds of people in positions of authority over the years deliberately covered this up. I think they're guilty of that criminal offence and, frankly, should be going to prison. I'll give you one example.
Well, no, hold on, sorry. We're going to come in a moment to the Prime Minister's rhetoric towards you and people like you in a moment. But you were in authority. You're here to talk on respect for your party as a whole here. Your government, your party was in government for 14 years, and you're saying that people in authority are responsible for this. And essentially what you're saying is the only thing that changed was that one council, a small council, said that this was necessary, and that changed your position to say there needs to be a national statutory inquiry. I mean, that's saying that you in authority weren't doing enough yourselves.
As I said, I became Shadow Home Secretary in November.
Fine, but then you were explicitly criticising your former colleagues in government who occupied government for 14 years.
No, I'm saying, look, I've already gone through the list of the things the last government did, right? The J inquiry, the Rotherham inquiry, the Grooming Gangs Task Force, the collection of ethnicity data.
But you're saying that an Oldham Council call for a national statutory inquiry was the only reason why the facts changed?
My view today is that all of those things the last government did were important, they were valid, but I think we need to go further. And I've said that in Parliament. This is not news. I've said before that we should go further by having this statutory national inquiry to get to the bottom of the cover-up. And I'll give you an example of how this was covered up. There's a retired Detective Chief Inspector called John Peacock. He spent 30 years in GMP, and after his retirement, he worked for a charity investigating child sex abuse. Now, first of all, in Oldham, when he was a police officer in 2000, he was instructed by a senior officer to basically discontinue an investigation into abuse, and Oldham Social Services withdrew their support for his investigation. And then again, in 2010, when he was working for a charity after his retirement, he was again investigating child sexual abuse, this time in Bradford. He'd actually witnessed it with his own eyes. It's taking place in a taxi driver's car. And when he tried to raise this issue, a chief superintendent in the Bradford Police phoned him up, someone he knew from when he was in the force, phoned him up and said, just stop investigating this. I don't want to inflame tensions with Bradford's Muslim community. That is disgraceful. That senior police officer, he was either a superintendent or a chief superintendent, I think he's guilty of misconduct in public office as a result of what he did then, deliberately ignoring and, in fact, deliberately stopping an investigation into very young girls, like 10, 11, 12 years old, getting abused by these taxi drivers. That is absolutely disgraceful, and he and many others like him need to be held to account.
Obviously, he's not here to give us his right of reply on that, but assuming all of what you said is accurate, it is disgraceful. Hypothetically, let's suppose. But you've just said 2008, you said 2010, you said 2013. Surely that is the Conservative government at the time's responsibility, not Keir Starmer's.
Well, I've already listed all the things the last government did.
But they were not enough.
Yeah, they should have gone further.
And you said that the people in authority at the time may have shown criminal neglect.
So
which would be talking about your colleagues.
The people who deliberately... No, so people like, the then Home Secretaries initiated all of the inquiries I've described. The evidence...
Which were not sufficient.
The cover-ups that I've described by, for example, that police officer, by Oldham Social Services in 2010. Even as recently as last week, there was a trial convicting 7 men of Pakistani origin of abuse between 2001 and 2006. Social Services in Rochdale at the time described a 10-year-old girl, who was a victim, as a prostitute. Right, there are 3 examples. Now, those are local police forces, local councils, local social services. The Crown Prosecution Service, prior to 2010, didn't prosecute some of these cases properly. Those are the people who deliberately covered this up.
Look, it is all horrific. And almost can't even imagine how horrific it is. But if the Prime Minister is guilty of taking too long, 6 months, to initiate this statutory national inquiry, then you must acknowledge that the Conservative government, over 14 years, is also guilty of taking too long and not doing enough.
Well, I've already gone through, I think 3 times now, all of the things the last government did. The J inquiry, the Rotherham inquiry, the Grooming Gangs Task Force.
Are you saying you deserve praise for that and the government deserves criticism for 6 months of delays? Or do you also acknowledge, despite listing all of those things for 3 times, that it wasn't enough and that you deserve almost as much, if not more, criticism for not doing enough to stop this for 14 years?
No, I've gone through what the last government did, which was very, very extensive indeed. We were in the process of implementing the J recommendations when the election was called. But when this new evidence came out from Oldham Council and this testimony from people like John Peacock, that DCI I mentioned, that only came out about 2 months ago. Keir Starmer should have responded quickly. He's the Prime Minister today. And when this was raised, I think it was in early January, at a press conference he was giving, he smeared people. He smeared campaigners as jumping on a far-right bandwagon. That's what he said, a far-right bandwagon. A few months later, the Leader of the Commons said it was, quotes, a dog whistle, even to raise the issue at all. Now, no Conservative ever spoke in those terms. It is, frankly, Keir Starmer should apologise for that disgraceful smear, calling it a far-right bandwagon. It is not a far-right bandwagon to stand up for girls aged as young as 10 who are being systematically abused, where that abuse was then deliberately covered up because the perpetrators were predominantly of Pakistani heritage. That is absolutely wrong. It's not a far-right bandwagon, and Keir Starmer should be apologising.
There's so much more we could say on this. We are out of time, but we have to leave it there because we've got to go on to our next guest, the former Prime Minister of Israel. Chris Philp, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to see you as always, the Shadow Home Secretary. Quick look at the weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The weather will remain cool and unsettled in the northwest over the coming days, but high pressure building in the south will bring warm sunshine for many. Temperatures will rise day on day with the potential of seeing 30 Celsius by the end of the week. This morning, early mist and fog over southwestern parts will clear to brighter skies for much of the country. It'll be dry, sunny start to the day after a mild night. Fair weather cloud will bubble up through the morning, but it'll be warm with temperatures topping 20 Celsius for many and peaking at 26 Celsius in the south, 79 Fahrenheit.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, up next we'll talk to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, on where the conflict with Iran might turn next, and also talk to the director of Diplo House think tank in Iran.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up in just a moment, we'll speak to the former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett after another night of conflict between Israel and Iran. But first, a reminder of the top stories this hour. The death toll overnight, according to Israel, is 8 people, with some 70 injured following strikes by Iran. Explosions have been reported in central Tehran in Iran, as well as the two countries trade strikes for a 4th day. A man suspected of shooting dead a US politician and her husband and wounding 2 others in Minnesota has been arrested. Vance Volter was detained following a 2-day manhunt after Melissa and Mark Hortman were killed at their home on Saturday. The Prime Minister's arrived in Canada for a meeting of the world's wealthiest nations. Sir Keir Starmer says the conference is an opportunity for leaders to have a broad conversation about global security in a constructive way as the conflict between Israel and Iran continues to escalate. A nationwide police operation to track down those in grooming gangs has been announced by the Home Office. It comes ahead of the release of a government-commissioned rapid review into the scale of grooming gangs across the country, due to be published today. Right, let's return to our top story, conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. In a moment, we'll go to Tehran, but first let's speak to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, who joins me now. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What is your latest reaction to the scale of attacks that Israel has received in the last 4 days domestically, but including overnight?
Well, Israeli population centers have been attacked by Iranian ballistic missiles, and in several cases, the ballistic missiles directly hit residential buildings. So we have 29 dead and I think hundreds of wounded. It's very unpleasant, but we're resolute. We understand that if we don't act now to remove this threat, next time around, it wouldn't be just ballistic missiles with conventional weapons. It would be ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. So we act now, and the pain is much smaller in present than in the future.
Is this a war of defense, or is it fair to say at least that it is a proactive offensive action by Israel to protect its ability to defend itself in the future?
It's a preemptive war of defense. When you know that your enemy that explicitly says that it wants to remove Israel from the face of Earth is rapidly developing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, so we have to act now. The nuclear weapons aren't just going to go away, and we have a tendency now to believe our enemies. When they say they want to annihilate Israel, we believe them. So we're acting now.
How confident are you that you can remove any nuclear capability from Iran, given, by all accounts, it is deep underground, deeply hidden?
Well, not all of their program is deep underground. So much of the program, including the Natanz facility, enrichment facility, is on the surface, and we've destroyed much of that base. And that's the central enrichment facility in Iran. But you're right, we don't have necessarily the capacity to remove everything. Nevertheless, you got to do what you can and not just sit idle and wait for your annihilation.
Might it require Israeli ground troops to enter Iran?
I don't want to share any operational ideas, but we need to end this round, this conflict, with Iran that does not have the capacity to develop nuclear weapons. We're not looking for any war with anyone. If Iran would lay down its nuclear program and stop attacking Israel, and I'll remind you that last year, twice in two different events. It hurled hundreds of rockets and missiles towards Israel, unprovoked. If it doesn't do all of this, then we can have peace in the Middle East.
Would US capabilities, perhaps other Western capabilities, but the US clearly the leader on this, allow you to remove Iran's nuclear capabilities more efficiently, let's say?
Well, certainly the United States has specific arms and capabilities that Israel does not have that can deal with the underground facilities such as Fordo, where they enrich uranium. We're not telling America what to do. We're not urging America what to do. I would say, though, that, in a sense, Israel is doing the hard work on behalf of the rest of the world. We're the ones paying the price. An Iranian nuclear regime would be a nightmare for the entire world. So, if you will, we're the boots on the ground. We're not asking anything from anyone. We're willing to do the job, but I do think that it would be in the world's interest to remove this nuclear menace. Imagine if someone had done this to prevent North Korea from going nuclear, we'd have a much safer world. No one did it. Now Israel is acting, paying the price, and we do, every country will make its own decisions.
You mentioned at the top it was a preemptive strike to protect Israel's ability to defend itself. What was, in your eyes, the precise justification for the timing to be preemptive? When was the line crossed that allowed that preemptive strike?
It's a combination of three components. One, Iran, unprovoked, shot hundreds of missiles and rockets at Israel. We didn't do anything against Iran, and they did this twice last year. The second thing is that they reached the amount of enriched uranium, highly grade enriched uranium, enough to create 10 nuclear warheads, and this is recent. And finally, we have a very narrow window of opportunity where Iran is vulnerable. And I want to emphasize, we are not at war with the Iranian people. We are at war with the regime. The Iranian people are not Israel's enemy. It's a great nation. We have a great common history with the Persians. The war is only with the Mullah regime. So the combination of these three made it critical to act now.
Just finally, has this action united, do you think, Israel behind, not so much the action, but behind your Prime Minister at the moment? Is everyone in support of Benjamin Netanyahu?
Everyone's in support of defending Israel. Clearly, Israel's a democracy, and there's opposition and the coalition. I think generally, not in respect to this war, that this government should be replaced. That's no secret. But on the war or campaign to remove this menace, we should have done this long ago, but better now than never. We all stand united, right and left, opposition and coalition.
Thanks so much for joining us, Naftali Bennett, the former Prime Minister of Israel. Let's get a response now from the other side. Joining us from Tehran is the director of the Iran-based think tank Diplo House, Hamid Reza Gholam Zadeh. Thank you so much for joining us. What is, I guess, first of all, your response to Naftali Bennett's justification towards the end of the interview of the timing and legitimacy of making their incursion into Iran?
You know, I really like the storytelling capability of Mr. Bennett and Israelis, because what he said was quite wrong and totally disinformation. The Israelis started such campaigns by attacking Iranian consulate section in Damascus last year, and after that, Iran responded. Then they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, and then Iran responded, and of course some other Iranian officials as well. And that was like that. And then the third time they attacked Iran, Iran showed restraint and did not attack Israelis. And now they are attacking Iran again without anything. They just call it preemptive defense, but it's not like that. So it's just the myth that they are creating in order to try to weaken Iran and destroy Iran. So they are killing civilians. Their war minister has just this morning threatened Iranian citizens of Tehran, clearly mentions that we are going to target civilians and citizens of Tehran. That's what their official is saying. So the myth that they are just against the Islamic so-called regime is totally false. From the very early attacks, the earliest hours, they have been killing civilians. They are targeting civilians everywhere. They are targeting civilian infrastructure. They just bombed a square in northern Tehran yesterday. And that region is it was actually a water pipeline. And they clearly knew that they are targeting that facility. And people in that region don't have water pipelines right now. So that's the reality on the ground here in Iran, that the Israelis and their puppets and their infiltrators are killing people, are killing civilians. Yeah, they're targeting some commanders and officials as well. But the reality on the ground is that they are deliberately targeting civilians because they want to spread fear among the nation. But quite unfortunately for them, and very fortunately for us, they have united the Iranian nation more than ever before, at least for the past several years. Iranians are totally united, and even those dissidents, and even those who have left the country, even those who are against the government here in Iran, all of them are united, and they are showing solidarity with the rest of the Iranians.
Is it fair to say, though, that Iran has been pursuing a nuclear weapon and gotten quite close to it? Of course, it is a fact that talks with the US broke down recently as well.
No, it's just a myth that they are creating. They have been creating for so long. If Iran wanted to have a nuclear weapon, it would have done it long ago, and it was capable of doing that. The point is that Iran does not need and does not want a nuclear bomb. So, as I said, even if they wanted, it was not waiting for the permission from the world community. It was not permission from the United States or the Israelis or the others. And none of them could prevent Iran from doing that. They didn't want Iran to have 20% enrichment, while it was needed for medical purposes. And contrary to the legislation and charter of the IAEA, they did not provide Iran with enriched uranium at that time, long ago, 2 decades ago. And Iran had to work on enriching uranium to 20% level itself and domestically. Iran did not want to go there. They did not do that. So after that, Iran moved forward and enriched uranium to 20%, and that's it. They didn't want Iran to have the 20% enrichment, and Iran made it. They didn't want Iran to have 60%. Iran made it. If Iran wanted to have nuclear bomb, they would have done it. And none of them, neither IAEA, nor NPT, nor the United States, nor the Israelis could stop Iran. And one other false information that Mr. Bennett provided is about Natanz facility. The most important part of the Natanz facility is underground. I come from Natanz, actually. I originally am from Natanz, and I'm familiar with that region and with the facility. The part on the ground, on the surface part, is just a minor part of the facilities. We can say the worth of that is 30% of the facility. The main part is under the ground, well protected. And according to the IAEA General Director, Mr. Grossi has confirmed that the damage has been minor, and the contamination and the radiation there is not that significant. And there has been some damage, but it's not serious. So they have totally failed to destroy Iranian capability of enrichment of uranium.
I guess the argument that you're making there, therefore, isn't just against Israel, but a lot of the West, who for well over a decade have argued that Iran has been pursuing a nuclear weapon. It brings me just on to my next question, rather than relitigating that point, which is, what is your assumption towards the Iranian regime as to whether other Western countries, obviously the US in particular, but also the UK, are considered responsible for this, given that they do back Israel ultimately as an ally? Oh, I think he's frozen. Let's see if we can reconnect there. No, we've lost that connection, and it's not coming back, alas. That was Hamid Reza Gholam Zadeh. We'll bring you more on that story, of course, throughout the morning. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. We'll have more on the appointment of Britain's first female spy chief. That's next.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters. We love Trump! I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor, free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
A national inquiry into criminal grooming gangs will be announced today. Let's talk more about this by the Labour MP for Rotherham, Sarah Champion. Thanks so much for joining us. Sarah, your reaction to this news?
Well, huge relief, because I hope finally we will get to the bottom of what's going on with these gangs, how they've been allowed to flourish for so long, and hopefully get justice for the victims and survivors who have waited, in some cases, 60 years for the ones that I've spoken to. We need to get to the truth, and let's hope that this is when we do it.
Do you see this as a U-turn by the Prime Minister?
I don't really care, if I'm quite honest. I'm just glad that it's getting done. So when the calls first came for a national inquiry, I was quite reluctant myself, because 10 years ago, I worked with Tom Watson and Zach Goldsmith, and we got the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. That lasted 7 years and cost nearly £200 million. So the thought of doing another one when the recommendations from the last one still haven't gone through filled me with doom. But then I thought, actually, the specific model of Pakistani men grooming girls and some boys in this country, it keeps on coming up because people don't think that justice has been done in a fair way. So I think unless we get to the bottom of this, it's always going to be a sore that we need to address. So let's sort it out once and for all. What's motivating these people? Why is it that those in authority haven't taken the action that they need to take? And how do we make sure that every child is safe? That's what I want to know, and I hope that that's what the inquiry delivers.
So put aside whether it's a U-turn or not, do you regret some of the rhetoric from the Prime Minister or colleagues earlier this year to frame whatever exactly the motivation or precise wording was, but to suggest that those calling for a national statutory inquiry were jumping on bandwagons of the far right and the like?
Yeah, it's not helpful. I mean, what we need to be looking at is how do we protect children, and how do we make sure that the law is carried out without fear or favour. I think always this crime has had those who want to make mischief rather than just put perpetrators behind bars. It doesn't help. It muddies the water. It stops the authorities from doing their job because it makes them nervous that they might have similar smears thrown at them. What we need to do is just protect children, use the law, which is effective, but hasn't been used to date. And I don't know why that hasn't happened. It's an intense frustration, and children have been let down and exploited as a consequence of it.
So we wait to hear from the Home Secretary later today. What are the key things you'll be looking out for, I guess, in terms specifically of what the remit and time frame of this inquiry will be?
I mean, for me, I've been calling since January for the inquiry to effectively be a hub and spoke model. So it needs to be national so that we've got the statutory powers to compel witnesses to come. Because what we've seen in other inquiries that have been done locally is without being able to force people, those that actually had responsibility and let children down just don't turn up. But I also think they need to be independently locally led, because we need to get to the bottom of what's going on locally, but we need to have that trust there. But the news which made me most happy this morning was that the National Crime Agency is going to be involved. And the reason this is important is because they have a national remit. So what I don't want to see is we deal with each sort of isolated case of grooming gangs. What I want to see is the national picture, because I'm quite convinced that it's not a coincidence that each of these gangs that gets prosecuted uses the same the same measures of recruitment, the same exploitation, the same abuse, and the same trafficking. I think there is a commonality there, and I'm assuming it's organised crime. But without a national crime investigation, we're never going to get to the bottom of this, and so it's going to be allowed to continue in a slightly different guise.
Sarah Champion, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Right, MI6 has named its first female head to lead the foreign agency, soon to be known as C. Blaise Metraweli will take the top job after more than 25 years across the security services. Amelia Harper here to tell us a bit more about this historic moment, but also her own background.
Yeah, it really is. This is the first time that MI6, also known as Britain's secret intelligence service, will actually be led by a woman. And you have MI5 and MI6. And just to separate the two, MI6 is the agency that deals with foreign intelligence threats, and MI5 is the one that deals with domestic threats. And Blaise Metraweli joined MI6 in 1999. She is currently the Director of Technology there at the moment, known as Q. We'll come on to code names in a second. And she's previously been a director at MI5 and spent a lot of her career working across Europe and across the Middle East. And she'll become the 18th chief of the organisation, reporting to the Foreign Secretary, and she'll be taking over from Sir Richard Moore, who's a senior civil servant who will step down later this year. But at the moment, her codename is Q. Now, in her new role, when she steps into the lead, she'll be known as C. And it's a common misconception that C stands for chief. That is not what it stands for. It goes back to the 1990s when Britain's first spy agency, called the Secret Service Bureau, was set up. And it was led by a Royal Naval officer called Captain Mansfield Cumming, and he always signed his letters with the letter C. And that is how C came to stick as a code name, and all heads of MI6 are codenamed as C. And the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has called this a historic appointment.
Yeah, really interesting, Amelia. Great stuff. Always fun to talk a little bit about spy stuff. We are going to have a quick look at the weather now.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The weather will remain cool and unsettled in the northwest over the coming days, but high pressure building in the south will bring warm sunshine for many. Temperatures will rise on the day with potential of 30 Celsius by the end of the week. This morning, early mist and fog over southwestern parts will clear to brighter skies. For much of the country, it'll be a dry, sunny start to the day after a mild night. That's your weather.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
We're going to take a quick break, but Mari, we'll be talking more about the politics of this grooming announcement. What did you make of Sarah Champion there, Labour MP, with some criticism?
Yeah, she was criticising the Prime Minister for his rhetoric around accusing the Tories of jumping on a bandwagon. She said that it made officials more afraid of being smeared in the same way. Really interesting that she was mirroring their language and Chris Philp's language to an extent that it was a smear and not helpful from the Prime Minister. I think those comments are going to come back and really cause him some problems.
We'll have more on that, more on what Chris Philp said, and all of the day's other top stories after this short break.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock on today's show. Donald Trump calls on Israel and Iran to make a deal as the conflict intensifies.
Plus, police launch a nationwide investigation into grooming gangs.
It's Monday, the 16th of June. Your headlines. 8 killed and more than 70 injured as Iranian rockets hit Israel.
A massive barrage struck Israel shortly after 4 a.m. this morning. Rescue workers are still trying to find people trapped under the rubble.
Iran says that more than 200 people have been killed in Israeli attacks since Friday. The crisis set to dominate the agenda for world leaders at the G7 summit in Canada. And Meghan shares a Father's Day tribute to Prince Harry. Good morning. It's been another night of destruction in the Middle East. The conflict between Israel and Iran is intensifying, with both sides launching more strikes. These are live pictures from central Israel showing the aftermath of a missile strike. Israeli Army radio is reporting that 8 people have been killed. We've spoken to both sides in this conflict. Earlier, I spoke to former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who told me Israel are acting to make the world a safer place. Would US capabilities, perhaps other Western capabilities, but the US clearly the leader on this, allow you to remove Iran's nuclear capabilities more efficiently, let's say?
Well, certainly the United States has specific arms and capabilities that Israel does not have that can deal with the underground facilities such as Fordo, where they enrich uranium. We're not telling America what to do. We're not urging America what to do. I would say, though, that, in a sense, Israel is doing the hard work on behalf of the rest of the world. We're the ones paying the price. An Iranian nuclear regime would be a nightmare for the entire world. So, if you will, we're the boots on the ground. We're not asking anything from anyone. We're willing to do the job. But I do think that it would be in the world's interest to remove this nuclear menace. Imagine if someone had done this to prevent North Korea from going nuclear, we'd have a much safer world. No one did it. Now Israel is acting, paying the price, and we do, every country will make its own decisions.
You mentioned at the top it was a preemptive strike to protect Israel's ability to defend itself. What was in your eyes, the precise justification for the timing to be preemptive? When was the line crossed that allowed that preemptive strike?
It's a combination of 3 components. One, Iran, unprovoked, shot hundreds of missiles and rockets at Israel. We didn't do anything against Iran, and they did this twice last year. The second thing is that they reached the amount of enriched uranium, highly grade enriched uranium, enough to create 10 nuclear warheads, and this is recent. And finally, we have a very narrow window of opportunity where Iran is vulnerable. And I want to emphasize, we are not at war with the Iranian people. We are at war with the regime. The Iranian people are not Israel's enemy. It's a great nation. We have a great common history with the Persians. The war is only with the Mullah regime.
We also spoke to the director of the Iran-based think tank Diplo House, Hamid Reza Gholamzadeh.
The myth that they are just against the Islamic so-called regime is totally false. From the very early attacks, the earliest hours, they have been killing civilians. They are targeting civilians everywhere. They are targeting civilian infrastructure. They just bombed a square in northern Tehran yesterday. And that region is not, it was actually a water pipeline. And they clearly knew that they are targeting that facility.
We are expecting a press conference from the IDF at 9:30 a.m. So we'll keep you posted on that, of course, due in the next 25 minutes as we look there at the live pictures in central Israel where the death toll was reported as 8 from the latest overnight attacks on what's now been a 4-day exchange of military fire between the two nations. Mari, this will be the top item, obviously, on the agenda at the G7. The Prime Minister arrived in Canada yesterday for that.
Yes, exactly that. So Emma Reynolds on the programme actually gave us a bit of an insight into some of the diplomatic conversations that's been going on since the Prime Minister has arrived in Canada. He's been speaking to the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Canadians. We know Donald Trump is going to be there. He's also spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu himself as well, and the UK government is urging de-escalation and diplomacy rather than violence, bombs attacking and military force. So far, clearly, it continues, but the hope from the UK government is that they can find a way to put some diplomatic pressure on both Iran and Israel and to stop some of these military strikes.
Also, of course, relevant today has been the announcement of a national inquiry into criminal grooming gangs. National, statutory, which was not delivered by the government, but with some pretty explicit pushback at the time 6 months ago.
Exactly. So originally the government was saying they were going to do a multiple series of local inquiries in different areas across the country, and that was the best course of action and the swiftest way to get justice for victims. Now they have U-turned and they are saying, actually, we're going to do a national inquiry. That's after the Baroness Casey has done a quick review into this and essentially has found holes in the original process. And so she believes actually it is necessary to have this national statutory inquiry in order to essentially make sure that no stone is turned and goes unturned, especially when it comes to perhaps those in power who were negligible in the way that they behaved or investigated or did not investigate certain things. And so now we have the National Crime Agency involved in this nationwide police investigation. They're going to be looking at historic cases to see if they can pursue any cases that were originally shut down. We've already had over 800 cases reopened since the Home Secretary started looking into this, but nonetheless we could see even more reopened as a result of some of these investigations. The difficulty for Labour politically is that they were accusing the Conservatives of jumping on a kind of far-right bandwagon when calling for a national inquiry, and now they look like they've essentially moved into the Tories' position.
Let's get a perspective from Rochdale, because our North of England correspondent Shingi Marariki joins us from there. How's this gone down there, Shingi?
Morning, Wilf. Well, I think beneath the politics and the back and forth in Westminster are people in places like Rochdale, but also across the north of England and the Midlands, who are victims of trafficking, of sexual abuse over the course of those years. And I think one stark reminder of that came on Friday when a group of 7 men from the Greater Manchester area operating in and around Rochdale were found guilty of turning 2 teenage girls into their sex slaves. Those 2 teenage girls were forced to have sex with the men wherever and whenever they wanted, including on rancid mattresses, in alleyways and car parks. And I think that case is also a microcosm of so many of the issues that will be addressed in the Casey report due later today. And those issues include the fact that one of the girls, who's now a woman, she's now in her 30s, spoke about how when she first raised the issue, she was dismissed by the social services for being a prostitute. And I also think that it's worth looking at the broader history here in Rochdale as a kind of way into looking at some of the issues across, not just here, but people being trafficked across parts of the country, including Bradford, where our colleague Jason Farrell reported from yesterday. And a report in January last year that was commissioned by Andy Burnham looked at Rochdale and said that girls were left at the mercy of paedophile grooming gangs for years because of failings by senior police and senior council staff. And that meant that potential victims, largely white from working class, poorer backgrounds, who were being groomed and abused by men who were largely from Asian backgrounds, were let down. And I think people here will welcome a national inquiry as a chance to scrutinise so many failings over the last couple of decades now, essentially.
Shingi, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Well, of course, a topic that came up in our interviews with the government, Emma Reynolds, and the opposition, Chris Philp. Is it not regretful to have framed some of those who called for the type of inquiry you're now putting in place, to frame them as amplifying what the far right is saying? Is it worth acknowledging that that rhetoric was a mistake?
Well, Jess Phillips, as you know, the safeguarding minister, has been subject to a vile abuse. And the comments that the Prime Minister made about Conservative politicians was, frankly, our frustration that for many years, from 2022 to the time of the last election, those same politicians did nothing with those recommendations. They didn't take a single recommendation forward. And our priority as a government is to act as quickly as possible to bring those perpetrators to justice and to stop this from happening again.
Dozens or maybe hundreds of people in positions of authority over the years deliberately covered this up. I think they're guilty of that criminal offence and, frankly, should be going to prison. I'll give you one example.
Well, no, hold on, sorry. We're going to come in a moment to the Prime Minister's rhetoric towards you and people like you in a moment. But you were in authority. You're here to talk on respect for your party as a whole here. Your government, your party was in government for 14 years, and you're saying that people in authority are responsible for this. And essentially what you're saying is the only thing that changed was that one council, a small council, said that this was necessary, and that changed your position to say there needs to be a national statutory inquiry. I mean, that's saying that you in authority weren't doing enough yourselves.
As I said, I became Shadow Home Secretary in November.
Fine, but then you were explicitly criticising your former colleagues in government who occupied government for 14 years.
No, I'm saying, look, I've already gone through the list of the things the last government did, right? The J inquiry, the Rotherham inquiry, the Grooming Gangs Task Force, the collection of ethnicity data.
But you're saying that an Oldham Council call for a national statutory inquiry was the only reason why the facts changed?
My view today is that all of those things the last government did were important, they were valid, but I think we need to go further.
You know, I have to say, it's sort of extraordinary sometimes when you look at this, where maybe we have the benefit of hindsight from a few hours ago, but why wouldn't the government, in announcing this, come out and say, do you know what, 6 months ago we got this wrong, we're going to put it right and this is really important? And similarly, why wouldn't the Conservatives say we could have done more at the time and we've been calling for this since? Because both of them you just come away from thinking this is mad, that you're trying to make one argument but cover your tracks for some of these past rhetoric or past comments. And the other thing, it's such an important issue as well, I don't think a single viewer or voter doesn't see through both. It's mad.
I think it's really difficult, and I think for those who might be watching those interviews this morning, especially those who are the victims of, you know, it's always important to remember there are people involved in these scandals. They'll be watching it, and I think you're right. I think they'll be disappointed that nobody wants to take responsibility for the fact that somehow, somewhere, quite a large ball was dropped, and now it's being picked up, and now the public, are pleased about that. But the fact that it took a lot of pressure, a huge amount of time, where, as Shingi was just outlining, some of these victims are now in their 30s and are still not seeing justice, I think will be frustrating for people who feel that perhaps both parties have let them down. Yeah,
the only thing I'd just say as well is, maybe whoever was in power would have dropped the ball on this, and maybe there's a benefit of not being in power, and clearly with this, both of those two parties have been at some point in the relevant time. But you also have to acknowledge that Reform has done well on this. They've called for it. Maybe they have the luxury of not having been in a position of power, so they can't be held to account. Yeah. But they've been loud and clear on this from very early. They have, and it's given them a lot of traction. It's created a lot of anger, which has then drawn people to the Reform Party out of frustration or despair. Often Reform does well because people are so angry about certain things, and this is really one of those aspects where they know they can do very, very well on this topic. Secretary, what time? Should be, it depends on parliamentary procedure, but it'll be around 2, sometimes after 2, we expect, yeah. Mark, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. Right, let's get you up to speed on all today's other stories now. And the Foreign Secretary says the first British fatalities from a plane crash in India have been confirmed. In a post on social media site X, David Lammy expressed his condolences, saying the government is working tirelessly on the ground to support British nationals and their families. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner bound for London Gatwick Airport crashed into a residential area shortly after takeoff on Thursday, killing 241 people on board and at least 29 on the ground. The NHS app will soon allow you to sign up to clinical trials as part of the government's 10-year health plan. The aim is for patients to eventually be automatically matched to studies based on individual interests and health data. Doctors have trialled a new treatment for leukemia that doesn't require chemotherapy. They found that more than 9 out of 10 patients were still alive and the disease had not returned 5 years later. It's been hailed as a milestone. The man suspected of shooting a Democrat and her husband in Minnesota has been arrested and charged with murder after a 2-day manhunt. Sky's David Blevins has this report for us.
In custody. Double murder suspect Vance Bolter, apprehended in a field late last night.
That's 48 hours that law enforcement involved in a complex and dangerous manhunt. Spent Father's Day away from their families to deliver justice for Melissa and Mark Hortman and their children who spent this Father's Day alone.
A community stunned, gathering to pray and to remember. Former State Senator Melissa Hortman grew up here. She and her husband Mark were shot dead in what's been called a politically motivated assassination. Her party colleagues Matt and Erin are struggling to comprehend her violent death.
Feels like a bad dream. I woke up this morning and was like, okay, so that was real. And it's, hit me in waves, the grief and the anger and the sadness. And she was a leader. True definition of a leader.
It's going to be incumbent upon us as leaders to set a different tone, to set a different direction for our state and our country so that horrific tragedies like this never occur again.
State Senator John Hoffman and his wife had been shot and wounded. Police sent to check on his party colleague didn't get there in time. They exchanged fire with a gunman disguised as a police officer, but he escaped, sparking a manhunt. Friends say Melissa Hortman's children feared for their mother's life after reading posts online. Her death exemplifies an alarming rise in political violence, fueled by divisive rhetoric. But outside this state capital, they are united in their grief and in their hope for an end to gun violence in America. David Blevins, Sky News in Minneapolis.
Right, let's have a look at the weather now.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The weather will remain cool and unsettled in the northwest over the coming days, but high pressure building in the south will bring warm sunshine for many. Temperatures will rise day on day with the potential of seeing 30 Celsius by the end of the week. This morning, early mist and fog over southwestern parts will clear to brighter skies. For much of the country, it'll be a dry, sunny start to the day after a mild night. Fair weather cloud will bubble up through the morning, but it'll be warm with temperatures topping 20 Celsius for many and peaking at 26 Celsius in the south or 79 Fahrenheit. The northwest will be cooler with low cloud and hill fog. Later in the day, rain and fresher winds will push through Scotland.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
2 new photographs of Prince William and his 3 children have been released to mark Father's Day yesterday. First image shows the Prince posing in a garden with George, Charlotte and Louis. In the second, they can be seen playing in the grass. The pictures were taken in Norfolk earlier this year. Meanwhile, the Duchess of Sussex shared a tribute to Prince Harry to mark the occasion, describing him as the best. The post featured never-before-seen footage of the Duke playing with his children, Archie and Lilibet. A belated Happy Father's Day to them both. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, with rural crime on the rise in Wales, we'll hear from those impacted about how criminals are changing their methods.
Turkey is burying its dead. Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
The weather will become increasingly settled this week with temperatures rising day on day. The northwest, however, will see cloud and rain at times. Today, it'll be sunny and warm after early mist and fog clear from the southwest. As a result, the pollen count will rise. The grass season is well underway for most, with southern areas seeing a rise in weed pollen as well. Counts will be high for England, Wales and Northern Ireland and very high for eastern England. For northern Scotland, levels will be low.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
We've got some breaking news to bring you, just crossing from Iran's foreign ministry. They're saying that Parliament is preparing a bill to leave the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty for nuclear weapons, though they are also saying that they do remain opposed to weapons of mass destruction. We will keep you up to speed on that. Of course, it would be significant if they do formally pull out of that agreement. Now, rural crime has fallen across most of the UK, but not in Wales. Criminal gangs have targeted livestock, quad bikes and other agricultural machinery, costing farmers thousands of pounds, as our Dan Whitehead now reports.
This is the moment the farm's £10,000 quad bike was taken. 1 a.m, the thieves caught on a camera, normally used to monitor newborn calves.
As you can see here, we've got the calving camera on that back of the sheds.
It was the start of a spate of rural crime in West Wales last summer.
Since then, nearly 50 bikes have actually gone from the Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion area. So that was, every other day on Facebook you were seeing somebody posting that they'd lost a bike in the early hours of that morning. So, yeah, it was just completely mad to see how many were going in this short space of time.
New figures out today show rural crime in the UK cost an estimated £44.1 million last year. That's actually a fall of around 16% compared to 2023. Wales is the only UK nation that's seen a rise, with rural crime up 18% in 2024 to £2.8 million. It's not just agricultural machinery that's being taken.
They spend most of the time on the common. There's 5,000 acres here.
In Pontypool, sheep farmer James says he's had around 200 of his flock taken over the last 4 years, costing him around £20,000.
The problem is our flock's been going since 1936, so it's a closed flock. I don't buy stock in, it's purely our own breeding. So when I lose stock, I'm not just losing the money side of it, I'm losing the breeding as well.
Police say they are increasing resources to tackle rural crime this year and issuing DNA kits to mark valuable equipment. Most police forces in England and Wales do have a dedicated rural crime team, but policing large, sparsely populated areas like this, often with little or no CCTV, can make bringing convictions difficult. It's understood criminal gangs are now using drones to recce target areas.
NFU Mutual works closely with the National Rural Crime Unit, and what we've found increasingly is that organised criminals are targeting certain areas of the countryside. So they're hitting multiple farms in one night, they're raiding them, they're moving away to another area and then hitting multiple farms there. So it is hugely concerning.
For James and other farmers, they are becoming repeat victims of rural crime. Another challenge for an industry already struggling to stay in business. Dan Whitehead, Sky News.
Lots more to come here on The Breakfast Show. After the break, we're going to be talking to Lord Darroch, former ambassador to the US and national security advisor, on the significance of the G7 summit, but also the very latest on the Middle East, including that news that Iran is preparing to pull out of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. We're waiting to hear from the Israeli Defense Forces with an update on the overnight attacks by Iran and on Iran. We'll bring that to you when we have it. We're also about to speak to Lord Darroch to get his take on all of it. But first, let's remind you of all of the day's top stories. Israel says 8 people have died and more than 70 have been injured in overnight strikes by Iran. Explosions have also been reported in central Tehran as the two countries trade strikes for a 4th day. In the last few minutes, Iran's foreign ministry has said Parliament is preparing a bill to leave the treaty on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. The NPT aims to stop the spread of weapons of mass destruction to countries that don't currently hold them. The Prime Minister has arrived in Canada for a meeting of the world's wealthiest nation. Sikh Islam says the conference is an opportunity for leaders to have a broad conversation about global security in a constructive way as the conflict between Israel and Iran continues to escalate. A nationwide police operation to track down those in grooming gangs has been announced by the Home Office. It comes ahead of the release of a government-commissioned rapid review into the scale of grooming gangs across the country due to be published today. Right, let's talk about all the day's top stories, including the foreign affairs issues, the G7 taking place, and the situation in the Middle East. I'd like to say the former ambassador to the US, Lord Darroch, joins us now. A very good morning to you, Lord Darroch. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Wilf.
First, if I can get your take on that breaking news, the news that Iran is preparing legislation to pull out of the NPT, is that significant in your eyes?
It is significant. It's not completely unexpected, Wilf, because there's been speculation for a few days they would do this. Some would say it's irrelevant because Iran's already been declared in breach of its NPT obligations with this enrichment program and the further plans they have on this. But actually, this is the main route, this treaty, the NPT treaty, for preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons to countries which don't have them. And it's a bad step if Iran does withdraw, and it complicates any future deal with them on restraining their nuclear program. So, I mean, people could say, well, they're breaching it anyway, but actually it would be a damaging thing to happen.
It's kind of interesting, though. I mean, we just had a spokesperson from a Tehran-based think tank on who maintains that they could have had nuclear weapons if they'd wanted them, but that they're not enriching uranium for that purpose. If that's still the argument you're trying to make, why would you pull out of this treaty? It's almost waving the flag to admit to the fact that you are trying to develop a nuclear weapon.
It is, but it may be a breach, or it may be in response to either the fact that they were recently declared in breach of their NPT obligations just a few days ago at an IAEA meeting, or the fact that they believe Western countries are fundamentally supporting Israel in its attacks on Iran, and this is a kind of response. But it's a thoroughly negative step, so let's not say that this is something we can just set aside.
Is it fair to say that Western countries are supporting Israel in their actions?
No, I don't think it is. I think, as you'll see at the G7, where this issue, this conflict will, I think, suddenly dominate the agenda, pretty much everyone wants this conflict to stop because of the risks for the global economy of unrest in the Gulf and possible Italian retaliation against Iranian retaliation against Western interests in the Gulf. I mean, they've done it before with mining the Straits of Hormuz back in the 80s, and a fifth of the world's oil supply comes out of the Gulf. So this is very bad for everyone, and we all want it to stop. But the only country, I'm afraid, Wilf, that has real influence with Israel is the United States. So there'll be a lot of pressure on Donald Trump over the next 48 hours to see what he can do to try and dissuade the Israelis.
But that's so interesting. Do you think that Keir Starmer then and other G7 allies will want, maybe they'll fail to achieve this, but will want to end the G7 with a joint statement outright condemning Israel for their actions?
I don't think the language will be condemnation, because I don't think the Americans would buy that. And actually, the Japanese have, may also pause on that, and the Germans. But I think there will be language that calls on both sides to de-escalate and basically stop firing missiles and drones at one another, plus the hope that Donald Trump will undertake to put more pressure. I don't think this would be expressed in any kind of written language, but they'd look for assurances from President Trump that he would put some pressure on Israel to stop this.
Do you think it's easy to dial back things at this point?
Yeah, you could. I mean, it's already gone too far and too long, and a lot of damage has been done and people killed. So it's really, really dangerous, this. But, you could, if you wanted, if both sides could be persuaded to do it, you could stop firing off all these missiles and drones and just call a halt to it. You could. I'm not saying it'll happen, but you could.
What's your take, though, on the broader significance of the G7? I mean, to state the obvious, Donald Trump is going to Canada.
Yes, and we'll all remember that famous photograph of his confrontation with Angela Merkel and other G7 leaders at the last G7, which was, I think, 2018 in Canada. And he's not really a multilateralist, as you know, Wilf. He's a guy who much prefers bilateral diplomacy. He doesn't like summits. He doesn't like having to listen to lots of other people. And, it will not be his favorite 48 hours the next 2 days. But with Iran and Israel, with Ukraine war and Zelensky coming up to the second part of the summit, and with all the risks to the global economy of Trump's tariffs, he is going to be the centre of attention over the next 48 hours.
What about Mark Carney? I mean, is this an opportunity for him to really step up on the world stage?
It is, and I think he's been very impressive so far. I think he handled his bilateral meeting with Trump in the Oval Office brilliantly. I think he's a class act, but he won't be thrilled about his agenda having been hijacked by the Iran-Israel conflict, and it was already difficult enough. They very sensibly decided not to do one of these 20-page communiques this time, to concentrate on maybe a few short statements on areas where they have agreed or decided collectively to act. And that's a sensible idea. But getting agreement on any of Iran, Israel, the world economy, and especially the future of Trump's tariff policies and Ukraine will not be easy. It's a real challenge for him.
What should the Prime Minister be focusing on, Keir Starmer, in terms of what he might be able to achieve from this gathering? I mean, it's interesting. It's almost as if he should keep a low profile because at the moment he's on fairly good terms with all of the attendees.
Well, I think that the way he's handled Donald Trump so far, he deserves credit for this because he's done it well. I think the problem with Trump is you're always walking a tightrope and things can go wrong quite easily. But the point about the G7 discussions is basically you have the leaders around a small table. They only have one official each in the room. It can be a genuinely private discussion. And if you want to try and persuade Donald Trump of something, don't do it with a megaphone through the media. Do it in private discussions with him. So there is a prospect, I think, of an intelligent and private and potentially constructive discussion with Trump around the table, to which Keir Starmer can make a major contribution. But, that's a really, really difficult agenda here.
Lord Darrett, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we're going to talk a little bit more about the appointment of Britain's first female spy chief. We'll also have that IDF spokesperson's conference when it begins.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Let's return now to the conflict between Israel and Iran. We're expecting to hear from the IDF momentarily, and we'll bring you that when it begins. But in the meantime, let's revisit the interview last night with the Iranian ambassador to the UK, Syed Ali Musavi, with our Yalda Hakim.
I do believe that the barbaric Israeli regime make another dirty page in his history of violation of international law. His activities against the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Iranian people make another criminal act in international law, according to the international law. You see, nowadays that we are witnessing an act of aggression against the one member of the United Nations. On the other hand, the Israeli regime has a very big collection of the crimes against, different peoples, especially in Gaza, Palestinian people, war crime, crime against humanity, genocide, and now another act of aggression. You see, this country based on and established on terrorism, based established on regarding for the violation of different rules and principles of international law. And so two international judicial bodies now asserted the genocide, crime against humanity, and war crime. And now we are witnessing another act of aggression against the Iran and Iranian people. You see that
Ambassador, Ambassador, I just want to get your reaction to the news that's come in the last hour or so.
Let me finish. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I just want to.
According to the Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, this is our inherent right to self-defense. Now we are defending ourselves according to the Charter of United Nations. There is no doubt that the one act of aggression has been placed against the Iranian territory. And according to this principle, this is a very important principle and in United Nations Charter and as well as international law, that to defend ourselves. There is no doubt that we are very firm into defending ourselves and regarding for all of the activities and reactions against the Israeli regime activities, all of them has been doing in the framework of legitimate right and inherent rights of self-defense.
Well, we will bring you that IDF press conference when it does begin. Meanwhile, MI6 has named its first female head to lead the foreign spy agency, soon to be known as C. Blaise Metroelli will take the top job after more than 25 years across the security services. Amelia's here to tell us a bit more about this significant moment.
It is really significant because this is the first time in 116 years of the organisation's history that a woman will head MI6. MI6, of course, being the organisation that looks to gather intelligence on foreign threats. We know, of course, MI6 and MI5, they are sister agencies, if you like, but this is just to do with MI6. MI5 is to do with domestic intelligence. And Blaise Metroelli is 47. She joined MI6 in 1999, and she's currently the Director of Technology at MI6, known as Q. And she's previously been a director of MI5, so she's a very experienced woman and has spent most of her career working in the Middle East and Europe. And she'll be the 18th chief of the organisation, reporting to the Foreign Secretary, and she'll take over from Sir Richard Moore, who is a senior civil servant who will step down later this year. And I mentioned her current codename Q. She's going to become C. Now, you might think that C stands for chief, but it actually doesn't. And it actually goes back to the 1900s, when Britain's very first spy agency was established, called the Secret Service Bureau. And it was led by someone called Captain Mansfield Cumming. He was a Royal Navy officer. And whenever he signed a letter, he would sign it with the word C. The code name then stuck, and all heads of MI6 are codenamed as C. And a little fun fact is that Cumming wrote in green ink. And apparently to this day, the head of MI6 is the only person in Whitehall who can write in green.
Is Q famously because of their quartermaster? Is that also a misnomer?
That is a good question.
Yeah.
It is something I've been looking up this morning. It's not entirely clear, to be honest with you, what Q is, but she will be called C, and that's how it is.
Either way, eminently qualified is the clear takeaway.
Yeah, very.
One way or another, and very, very interesting discussion as always. Amelia, great stuff. Thanks very much for that. Right, let's now pivot to this IDF press conference, which is beginning now.
We are at the fourth day of this operation, Rising Lion. The IDF continues with its fighting plan against the Iranians. It has continued to blow strikes at several areas all over Iran. And of course, the Iranian regime retaliates at our significant strikes, and we are paying a price for that. As we just experienced last night, we have managed to intercept many of these strikes. There were 2 barrages of missiles at Israel. 65 missiles were launched and dozens of drones. Most of them our air defense system, both at sea and in the air, managed to intercept. There were hits in both the north of Israel and in the center of it. Unfortunately, 8 civilians were killed and dozens were injured. This is the face of the Iranian terror regime. We strike at nuclear capabilities and military capabilities that were supposed to annihilate Israel, but they are targeting civilians. And this is exactly why we launched this operation, to remove this existential threat from over Israel, the nuclear and missile threat. I would like to send my heartfelt good wishes to those who have lost their loved ones. The IDF and the other rescue forces comes to every place where there was a hit in order to help and save lives. We debrief and study every such incident. Despite the complexity, the resilience and calmness that you, the civilians, express are outstanding. Continue to follow instructions. These are life-saving, and we keep receiving proof of that time and again. We've known difficult times, and we're going to pass these days together. Please be vigilant. Now we can say that we have full aerial supremacy over the skies of Iran. We are targeting Iranian units that are launching missiles towards Israel and towards our aircrafts. And the capabilities we've seen in Gaza, Lebanon, and the West Bank, we now see in Iran as well. We finished a round of strikes in Tehran yesterday, targeting 20 headquarters of the military and the Quds Force. We've managed to target the chief of intel. The Quds Force is a key terror branch of the Iranian regime, and they are responsible for operating against Israel and also sending out various means of warfare. And they are the source of many of the attacks against Israel in recent years. And many of their capabilities have been completely annihilated. The strikes yesterday started with targeting the aerial defense systems that were supposed to protect military centers as well as Quds centers at the heart of Tehran. And then we attacked the headquarters with dozens of aircrafts, including the headquarters of the nuclear project. And these were placed specifically inside buildings and high-rises. The leaders of the regime thought that would make them immune and that we wouldn't be able to find them, but that was a mistake. We managed to identify and attack them in a surgical manner, strike after strike, blow after blow, not just in Tehran, all over Iran. Overnight, we managed a significant strike over several areas at the center of Iran, and over 50 fighter jets and other aircraft participated, attacking and destroying over 120 launchers of surface-to-surface missiles. This is 1/3 of the launchers that they have. These are big launchers. Some of them are located on trucks that are spread all over Iran. Every launcher was supposed to launch dozens of missiles towards the Israeli home front and Israeli assets. These attacks led to a situation that in last night's barrage, they managed to launch only half of the missiles they planned to. In addition to these launchers, we also attacked the facilities manufacturing and storing the missiles. All the different attacks I've just described accumulated to a very deep and extensive strike at their capabilities. We are continuing with our plan. The Chief of General Staff ordered and instructed to continue to target the launchers. We're going to add additional strikes, and we're going to continue to achieve our target to remove the existential threat threat, whether it's the nuclear capability or their missiles. And this is a reminder of the magnitude of this campaign. And this is why we decided to go for this operation. The IDF forces are continuing to operate in other areas of combat, our northern border, Gaza, the West Bank, and Yemen. I have spoken with commanders in the field and in the headquarters, and I've heard determination, courage, and endless devotion. All of the IDF systems in the land, in the sea, in the air, and the various logistical support systems, everybody's operating 24/7 in order to protect this country and its civilians. I would like to once again stress, follow the instructions of the Junta Command. We shall lift this threat. We will know more difficult times, but we'll survive together and win. I'm going to continue to appear here and update on every development and answer every question. That is our role. Questions. The Minister of Defense wrote this morning that the people of Tehran will pay the price. What did he mean? The IDF is attacking with a great force. This terror regime in Iran continues to be harmed, and it hurts them. These strikes, we're going to continue to follow our plan. I'm not going to detail our next targets, but we're going to continue to operate. Which targets of this war? What are the targets of this war as the IDF presented them to the government? The IDF operates according to the goals that were defined by the government, and we act to achieve them in every way we can. And the targets haven't changed, and we are acting to achieve them. Does the IDF have a prepared program to target the Iranian government? We operate according to a well-planned, gradual program. We're advancing according to our plan, and I'm not going to expose to the Iranian regime right now what our goals and targets for the future are. As part of the goals of this operation, and in order to exert pressure, will it strike at such targets as energy, gas, and oil? We are operating to lift the threat. The purpose is to remove the missile threat and the nuclear threat from Israel. We're going to continue to operate according to our plan. Here as well, I do not want to refer to our bank of targets. How will the IDF operate in order to prevent a war of attrition with Iran? As the Chief of General Staff said last night in his statement, we're operating according to our plan, and we are constantly updating it, adapting it to the situation, and we're going to continue to follow that plan. Thank you very much.
That was the Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson just confirming that they killed 4 senior Iranian intelligence officers, including the head of the IRGC intelligence organization, and saying that specifically overnight they struck more than 20 targets and did talk there about being confident that they did have overall air supremacy, that coming, of course, following a fourth night of exchanges, military exchanges between Israel and Iran that included 8 deaths on the Israeli side, some 200 or so, according to Iranian authorities, over the course of the last 4 days. On the Iranian side, Mari's here. Of course, Mari, this topic will top the agenda at the G7 in Canada. The Prime Minister touched down there yesterday.
Yes, exactly that. So we've seen the Prime Minister arriving in Canada for that G7 meeting. So far, he's already spoken to the Italians, the French, the Germans, the Canadians. He's talking about things like trade deals. But as you're rightly saying, this will be the top of the agenda, what is unfolding currently between Israel and Iran. The UK government's position remains that they are urging both sides to de-escalate. They want a resolution that can be found through diplomatic channels rather than military might.
Domestically, on the agenda today, what will top it for the government?
So the biggest topic for the government today is the National Grooming Gangs inquiry. It's going to be announced in the House of Commons by Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, this afternoon, sometime after 2 o'clock, we expect it to be. And essentially, this is a massive U-turn from the original local-led inquiries that they originally announced. They resisted those calls for a national inquiry for months. Lots of public outcry about that, and they insisted that the Conservative Party that were calling for it were jumping on a far-right bandwagon. Now the government appear to say that those comments were made in frustration at the time, and therefore they didn't really mean it. And so there'll be some level of frustration that it's taken this long to get to this point.
Coverage of that throughout the day here on Sky News. Before we leave you, a quick look at the weather.
The perfect climate wherever the destination. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The weather will remain cool and unsettled in the northwest over the coming days, but high pressure building in the south will bring warm sunshine for many. Temperatures will rise day on day, with the potential seeing 30 Celsius by the end of the week. This morning, early mist and fog over southwestern parts will clear to brighter skies. For much of the country, it'll be a dry, sunny start to the day after a mild night. Fair weather cloud will bubble up through the morning, but it'll be warm with temperatures topping 20 Celsius for many and peaking at 26 in the south.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Lots more still to come on Sky News. Up next, it's Leah with Sky News Today. Don't go anywhere.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.